CIT 2021 with applied technology disruption. Today we have an international session. We had said this yesterday, from Córdoba to the world, with reference speakers of technological disruption, and they will be here speaking in this Tech Week in Córdoba, of which we are so proud to be part of, because we have more and more people attending, and we celebrate this CIT week. Today we are on the previous days of the 10th anniversary of Córdoba Technology Cluster, which is a very important date. We celebrate the 20th anniversary, and we will share a spot that talks about the history of the cluster in this video that summarizes the history with images and audio. In 1459, in Siena, Italy, the civilization had come up with humanism and knowledge, the ideal city.
En 2001, un grupo de empresas de tecnología creó el Córdoba Technology Cluster, impulsando programas para acompañar el crecimiento del sector TIC y hacer de Córdoba el mejor lugar para el desarrollo de la industria tecnológica. De las primeras 10 empresas que empleaban a 500 personas a 130 entre empresas y universidades en 2010, marcando un crecimiento exponencial. 20 años después, el clúster es una comunidad de 300 socios que emplea más de 14.000 talentos, sector privado, público y académico, aliados estratégicos para impulsar la economía del conocimiento. Más empresas, más trabajo de calidad. Tenemos muchos desafíos por delante. Cada vez somos más, creando futuro.
It's so nice to see this idea of creating future. And this is what today's session is about, disruptive technologies that configure today's world for the future. I would like to say, those who are accompanying us, that we are in holiday in Córdoba with a number of people of 100 people, and we celebrate this event able to see each other again, and we welcome all of you who are attending via streaming. And this is the first time the cluster organizes this hybrid format with very good results, because we have people who cannot come to Córdoba, and now you can attend from anywhere in the world and share this session that started on Monday, and we will end up on Friday. So we will have a whole week full of knowledge, and as the cluster says, we will be creating future. This year, the cluster organizes it together with the government of Córdoba, the federal investment organization, and the support of different companies and the cluster CIT. We will mention them because they are key members: Cluster of San Francisco, Cluster Impulso Tecnológico from Villa Maria, Cluster Tecnológico Ria Cuarto, Sieca, Inodo, EduTech. A big applause for all of them, please, because they make this event possible. And I would like to share this news with you, and we said it yesterday, but it's worth mentioning again. The legislative power of Córdoba declares this event, this CIT Week 2021, organized by the technology industry, that together with the government of Córdoba, they celebrated virtually and face-to-face. It is signed by Guillermo Carlos Arias, the Secretary, Calvo, Vice Governor and President of the Legislative Power of the Province of Córdoba, and Julieta Rinaldi, Legislative legislator of the legislative power of Córdoba. On Monday, we started the event with different sessions opening today's topic, this week's topic, the technological disruption in different axes, and we will remind you which will be the topics, the theme axes: ATIC, biotechnology, sports, social development, entrepreneurship, mindset, finance, women and technology, government, innovation, cybersecurity, health, training, and talent. Throughout the week, different speakers, national and international speakers, will be in charge of providing their insights so as to deepen our knowledge about applied technology. This is an event that we started on Monday and will end up on Friday. And the topics, the sessions, will be in charge by EduTech. So let's get ready for the third day not without mentioning before and thanking our different sponsors: Platinum, Piensa, Gold, Macena, Sancor Salud, Grupo de Medicina Privada, Silver Sponsor, Axify, AirSat, Acefix, AG Group, Bitsion, Dixis, DLR, IT3, ITSC, La Voz del Interior, Nexo Consulting, Omint, Punto a Punto, Santander, The Fuzzy Fish, and Universidad Blas Pascal. And now it is time for some practical tips. We will share with you everything in the social networks. So if you're active on Twitter, you can share the event and tell the world that you are here with us today. The hashtag is Córdoba Week and hashtag Semana Tic. So you can share your insights of this event during this information. You can find the information in cordobaweek.com. As regards questions, after each session, we will have a Q&A session of 15 minutes each, so that you can make questions in different ways. You have a QR code on your table. You can scan it, and you can find a WhatsApp number to make questions. And for those of you who are at home or at your workplace, if you are abroad, the number is +54 9351 86 71 45 6. That's the WhatsApp number that you can also find it on the website. And it's a very practical way to make questions after each session. So let's get started now. And we will start with the first presentation, that is a presentation organized by the Cluster Tecnológico de Córdoba. The topic is Innovation, the Career on Quantum Computer, in charge by Mark Jackson, who is a quantum evangelist in quantum technology, and he got a university in Duke with a doctorate in physics in Columbia. Then he spent 10 years investigating the superchords and cosmology, and he has been a co-author of many articles. He's an adjunct professor in Singularity University and directors of Astronomers Without Frontiers. And the moderator of the Q&A session will be Omar Osenda, doctor in physics and researcher of the National University of Córdoba, and he will moderate the Q&A session. Before that, Omar will welcome Mark, who is already there.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Placer estar aquí en esta reunión en nombre de los organizadores de la organización. Quisiera agradecerte, Mark, porque esta presentación está siendo esperada con mucha ansiedad. Y pienso que tenemos un grado bastante alto de ansiedad porque todos escuchan sobre la computación cuántica, como la carrera para obtener la primera computadora y los otros avances. Entonces, que en cuanto a los detalles vas a tener que hablar por alrededor de 40 minutos y después va a haber 15 minutos más o menos para preguntas y respuestas del público, y yo voy a tratar de redireccionar todas esas preguntas para vos. Todos pueden mandar sus preguntas, no hay ninguna pregunta que sea tonta, es un tema muy amplio. Mark, tenés la palabra.
Hola a todos, es un placer hablar contigo hoy. Hablo un poco de español, pero será más fácil en inglés. Yes, so I'll have to do this in English, I'm sorry. So let me share my screen here. And I think you should be able to see that there. So I have the pleasure of telling you about quantum computing today. I am the quantum evangelist at Cambridge Quantum Computing. So I'd first like to just say a few words about the company that I work for. We focus exclusively on quantum computing and related technologies. We're about 7 years old, which makes us one of the oldest quantum computing companies. We have about 150 people, but we are in the process of merging with Honeywell's quantum group, and we will soon be the largest quantum computing company in the world. We have several different focus areas, including quantum chemistry, machine learning, compilers, and cybersecurity. And we're focused on near-term applications of quantum computing. So it's not just things in 20 years. We'd like to accomplish things in the shorter term, in the next few years. So I'd like to begin by introducing what is usually thought of to be the very first computer by Charles Babbage about 200 years ago. And even though this looks comically antiquated by today's standards, it actually has all the ingredients that we would identify in a modern computer. It has input devices and it has output devices. And in particular, the way that it stores and processes information is identical because it actually just uses tiny little switches, which are either on or off. And if you compare that to today's computers, like the laptop that I'm using to give this presentation on, we've obviously come a long way in terms of computational power and how easy it is to use, but this core idea is identical. And so what I'll be telling you about today is really the first breakthrough in 200 years in the way that we think about and calculate information. So by way of a very brief introduction to quantum computing, I just wanted to point out the difference. Normal computers work with bits, which are ones and zeros, on or off switches. Quantum computers work with quantum bits, or qubits, we call them. And a qubit can be a 0 and a 1 at the same time. And it's a bit like with coins. A normal computer works with a coin which is on a table. So it's heads or tails. It's one or the other. But a quantum computer works with a coin which is flipping in space. So it can be anywhere in between the 0 and 1. And when you combine that with another quantum physics concept called entanglement, you can unlock a huge number of states, we say. And I'll explain why this is so important in a moment. So on the upper left-hand corner here, this is my favorite molecule, caffeine, and it's not terribly large. It only has 24 atoms. But if you were to put this on a computer to simulate, you would need a computer about 1 to 10% of the size of the Earth. So that's theoretically possible, but it's not very practical. If you made the molecule just a little bit bigger, say 41 atoms, you could do it, but you would need a computer the size of the entire universe. So that's kind of the end of the theoretical limit. Even if you used the whole universe to make a computer, you wouldn't really be able to simulate it. And so this is why we thought of building quantum computers, because there are a lot of problems in science that we want to solve, but we never could solve them using normal computers. And if you look at the right-hand side of the screen, you see that with very modest requirements in quantum computing, with only a few hundred qubits, we can simulate this. And so that's why we're so excited. We could solve problems that we never could have hoped to have solved before. Just to give you some idea of how many qubits we're dealing with, Google and IBM predict that they will have 1,000 qubits in another 2 years, and they will have 1,000,000 qubits within 10 years. So this is very much within the realm of possibility of things that we could do in the next few years. Quantum computing will not just be one new thing. It will actually change every area of science and technology. So this is a kind of an overall schematic of all the different areas that we're learning about. And so we have quantum simulations and communication and algorithms and machine learning and chemistry. I could spend a long, long time talking about each of these. Unfortunately, I only have a few minutes to tell you what's happening. And so I'd like to focus on just the most important aspects. If there's one thing that I wanted to communicate to you today, it's that quantum computers do exist. This is not science fiction, fantasy, buzzword type things that we're talking about. They really do exist. They've existed for several years now. People program them. We're doing amazing things with them. On the left-hand side, this is a picture of one of IBM's machines. And you notice that it kind of looks like a chandelier that you would lower down. So the reason you don't usually get to see this, the center of the quantum computer, is because we usually put it in a giant refrigerator, which is kept near absolute zero. And this is because this type of technology, called superconducting, needs the materials to be at almost absolute zero before it can get these special quantum properties that we can take advantage of. The quantum computer on the right is one of Honeywell's machines, and it uses a different technology called ion trap. So it uses lasers to trap charged particles called ions, and then it can manipulate those as we wish. And each of these has its own advantages and disadvantages. It's not clear which type of technology will be the winner. There will probably be several winners. And so intense work and resources are being put into this right now. So these are some of the other groups. We know of over 100 quantum computers in the Western Hemisphere alone. So I've mentioned the superconducting approach, which is being used by IBM and Google and Rigetti. There is the ion trap, which I showed you is being used by Honeywell and IonQ. And there's also photonic and a few other approaches. And again, each of these has their own advantages and disadvantages. It's sort of like a marathon after 1 mile. Different groups are using different strategies, and it's not at all clear who's going to win. There was a big development about 2 years ago called quantum supremacy. And this was a result by Google and collaborators in which they found an example of something that a quantum computer could do that a normal computer couldn't do. And it wasn't a particularly useful example, but it was one thing that a quantum computer could do in a few minutes that would have taken a long, long time, like hundreds of thousands of years, on a supercomputer. And this has been evaluated and confirmed by the outside community. And so we still have a lot of work to do, of course, but it was a major milestone. And some people before this even had doubts about whether quantum computers could do anything that a normal computer couldn't do. It's not just the number of qubits that's important. It's also the quality of the qubits and how they're arranged. And so that's why there's been this metric introduced called the quantum volume. And it's a complicated formula to how to compute the quantum volume, but it takes into account all of these things. And so there's a single metric that we can use to evaluate the power of a quantum computer, and we can use it to compare different quantum computers. And so this is a chart showing the progress made by different quantum groups. And so I think many of you are probably familiar with Moore's law, in which the power of normal computers has doubled every 18 months or so. The blue line shows the progress just made by IBM, and they've actually been able to more than double the quantum volume every 12 months or so. And so that's a little bit faster than Moore's law. The orange line shows the progress made by Honeywell, and they're on a much faster trajectory. They've been able to increase the quantum volume by about a factor of 10 every year, and that they think that they can sustain this development. And so in a few years, we should see some really amazing results from quantum computers. This is what a quantum program looks like. And you see that it's unlike anything that you would put into a normal computer. So the horizontal lines represent qubits, and you read this from left to right, sort of like a musical score. So on the left-hand side, there's the initialization of each of the qubits. And so we usually initialize them into the 0 state, and then we apply different operations. So you see some of these operations act on just one qubit, like those blue H operations. And some of the operations combine 2 qubits, and there's an interaction between them. And so you have all these different operations, and then at the end, you measure the qubits. And only when you measure them do you force them to choose 0 or 1. So up until then, they're in this superposition or entanglement state, and you don't ever get to peek at what they're doing. But on the measurement, you're forcing them to choose, are they 0 or they 1? And it's probabilistic on which one they'll choose. And then, of course, once the measurement is done and it's a 0 or a 1, then it's just a regular binary result. And you can use that in your program however you wish. So every quantum program follows these steps. There's something called quantum error correction. And this is because qubits are very fragile. Because of the finickiness of quantum mechanics, any little disturbance spoils the quantum nature of them. And so we have to think about things like quantum error correction, in which you spread the information from one qubit among several qubits. And so we do theoretically understand how to do this. Right now, we're not quite at the point where we can do this in practice. About 2 months ago, Google and Honeywell published separate articles in which they were able to do this for one qubit in real time. So this was a major step forward, but we're not quite at the point where we can do this for all programs at a realistic level. So this will be a major advance. When we can finally do this at a practical level, we will really be able to see some sophisticated programs. Right now, since we're not able to do this quantum error correction, we have to kind of make do with the computers that we have. We have to keep the programs short and not include that many operations, because we know that at some point there will probably be an error which will spoil the program. And there's actually a formal term for this. It's called NISQ, or noisy intermediate scale quantum. And it means that the computers we have today are about 100-ish qubits. They have relatively high error rates. We can't take advantage of error correction, as I mentioned. And there's a lot of constraints about how the qubits are coupled to each other. And so to account for this, we have been putting a lot of focus on hybrid algorithms. And so that means that our quantum programs work in conjunction with a classical program. And a lot of the heavy lifting is done by the classical programs, because right now classical computers are more powerful. And so a lot of programs right now, even though we call them quantum algorithms, they're actually more hybrid type algorithms. So what could you do with a quantum computer? Why have we gone to all this effort to build these quantum computers? As I said, there's a lot of programs, a lot of things that we could never do with a normal computer that we think we could solve with a quantum computer. And some of these examples include chemistry, things like drug development and material science, so like designing personalized medicine or designing better batteries. For industry, doing things like supply chain management and logistics and optimization. There's a lot of machine learning problems people use all over. So especially financial institutions, they have trading algorithms. And so we think that we could come up with more efficient and accurate trading algorithms. And then finally in cybersecurity, as I'll talk more about in a few minutes. For machine learning, all quantum machine learning algorithms follow this same basic schematic. So again, each horizontal line there represents a qubit. Reading it from left to right, we prepare the quantum data set. And sometimes this is a bit of a bottleneck because we have to turn the classical data into quantum data before we can evaluate it. Then we evaluate the quantum model and then measure these different qubits. And so again, that measurement process turns all the quantum data back to the classical data. We then evaluate our classical model and give feedback into the quantum operations. And so there's this constant feedback so this is the learning part of the machine learning. And so eventually you should have some sort of minimum or maximum for the function that you're trying to optimize. And so this is the basic schematic of how machine learning works. There's a list now of different quantum algorithms. And so this is a list of some of the popular ones. And in the right-hand column, you'll see that there's speed up, which is either square root of n or log of n. And that's because most quantum algorithms offer either a quadratic or an exponential increase in speed compared to their classical counterpart. And so what we would really like to do is get the exponential speed up. And fortunately, there are some real world type algorithms which can do this. As I said, a lot of financial groups are especially interested in optimization type problems. And fortunately, this is one of the exponential type algorithms that we've dealt with. There's actually a real world type problem, which is being studied right now by Microsoft and Case Western Reserve, and that is radiotherapy. And so when groups treat cancer, they can use radiotherapy, but they don't want to use too much because it could harm the patient. And so there's a lot of optimization type issues, where to apply the radiotherapy and how much to use. And so it's a very ideal problem for this type of machine learning and optimization. And so, yes, Microsoft and Case Western Reserve are already using quantum machine learning for this type of problem. Another example of quantum machine learning being used is in the so-called knapsack problem. And this shows up all over the place, from job scheduling to storage optimization. And it's when you have some sort of finite capacity, like a knapsack, which can only carry so much, and you have several objects which you can place into the knapsack. Each of the objects has a weight and a value. So you're trying to maximize the value subject to the constraint that you can only put so much weight into this knapsack. And again, this shows up all over the place in different problems. And our scientific team developed a quantum version of this. And I want to show you here, these are actual outputs from the quantum computer. So regarding the graph on the left here, so you'll notice the horizontal axis represents all the different combinations of which item to put into the knapsack. So if it's a 0, the item is not there, and if it's a 1, it is there. This was a pretty small problem containing only 5 objects. And you'll see that one solution really peaks. So one stands out. It was the result about 72% of the time. And that is the correct solution. So that's good. We could check this with a classical computer. And this is very typical of quantum machine learning. Although it's faster, the trade-off is that you are not guaranteed to get the correct solution. So that's the trade-off when you use a quantum computer. The right-hand graph shows a larger version of the problem. So it had 10 items, and we did this on IBM's quantum simulator. Again, you usually get the correct solution, but not always. And so that's why it's important to run the simulation many times to see what the histogram is. And so usually you can figure out what the correct solution is. The final example of a machine learning type problem that we're working on is natural language processing. And I think that many of you are familiar with this. Devices like Alexa and Siri and chatbots and such use the different natural language processing algorithms to understand what we as humans are saying. So they turn different words into mathematical formula, which they can interpret. It was discovered by our research team that natural language processing has a very natural structure in quantum computing. And so they've been able to translate everything. And actually, just in these few days, we actually had a major announcement talking about a whole natural language processing platform that people will be able to use for this type of thing. So I next want to talk about quantum compilers. I think many of you are probably familiar with compilers from just normal computers. So a compiler is basically just a translator that turns what you program, like Python or C, into instructions for the machine. Because the machine, of course, can only understand instructions for its switches. A good compiler not only does the translation, it does it as efficiently as possible. And it of course, wants to make the program as small as possible, and it wants to make the program run as quickly as possible. It is exactly the same with a quantum compiler, and we have developed our own quantum compiler, which we call Ticket. So Ticket is language agnostic in the sense that you can use any of the popular quantum programming languages like IBM's Qiskit or Google's Cirq or Microsoft's Q#, and you can write your program and then execute it on any of the popular quantum hardware platforms, that by Honeywell or Google or IBM or any of the others that I've mentioned here. So Ticket not only does the translation and execution for you, it does so in the most efficient way possible. It has a lot of subroutines in it to first make your circuit as small as possible, and then find the most efficient way to execute it on the hardware that you've chosen. So it has a lot of different algorithms, and it performs these simplifications. So an example of this, so on the left-hand side here, So this is a typical 5-qubit quantum circuit. So you see, just like before, you have the initialization on the left-hand side, and you have some operations, and then you have measurement. Some of these qubits have 5-qubit coupling, meaning that one qubit will talk to 4 others. The quantum diagram on the right, so this is the IBM Melbourne machine, you'll see that at most it has 4-qubit couplings. So at most, one qubit is talking to 3 others. So naively, we might look at this and say that there's no way to run the program on the left-hand side on the computer on the right-hand side. That's actually not true. You can do it, but you have to do something called swapping. You have to move the information for one qubit around and do this cleverly enough so that you can run the program. So this is the type of thing that Ticket can do. We are always updating it. We have about a monthly update cadence. And so we are constantly updating with the latest hardware and algorithms. Several months ago, we removed all licensing restrictions. So it's completely free to use. You can use it however you wish. If you come up with $1 million app using this, that's fantastic. You don't need to let us know or pay us royalties or anything like that. The URL to download this from GitHub is there at the bottom of the screen. And so I would encourage you to use that. The big news that will be announced in about a week or two is that we are making it completely open source. So anyone can actually go into the source code itself. They can build their own extensions for applying it to whatever hardware they want, and they can add their own efficiency subroutines. So again, that will be announced in the next few days. So the final thing that I'd like to talk about is encryption. And I think many of you are probably familiar with the basics of encryption. When we send sensitive information on the internet, we're usually not sending the information itself. We're sending an encrypted version of that. So what that means is that we apply a complicated mathematical formula to the data, and that's what we send. And the person receiving that has a key where they can undo the encryption. And we do hear about hacking and so forth, but usually the hacking is because of human error. It's because someone left their password on a sticky pad on their desk or something like that. It's usually not because the formula was directly undone. And that's because we use formulas which are purposely so complicated that it would take computers a long, long time to do it. Unfortunately, some of these formulas that we chose decades ago are easily undone by quantum computers. And we didn't know that at the time, of course, because there were no quantum computers. And so this has a lot of security professionals very concerned. It's not something that quantum computers could do right now, but in a few years, it's possible that quantum computers could directly undo these formulas, meaning that anyone could read your email, even if it was so-called encrypted. So that's the bad news. And on this chart here, I show that on the upper part, about 99% of online encryption formulas are vulnerable to quantum computers. The good news is that people have already started developing protections against that. So mathematicians and computer scientists and physicists have already been developing new formulas, which we don't think quantum computers could hack. We're not sure yet. This is under investigation right now. The American government agency called NIST is having a contest. And last summer, they announced 7 finalists. In the next few years, they will probably announce 1 or 2 winners. So people are investigating them right now to see how sturdy they are against hacking. And so very soon we will probably have 1 or 2 winners. Now, I would not wait until you start reading headlines about hacking to make this upgrade. Because these 7 finalists already exist right now, I would strongly encourage you to begin upgrading right now if you're in a position to do this. And there's 2 reasons for this. The first reason is that it takes time to upgrade. So if you've ever tried to upgrade software for a big corporation or a government agency or something, you know that it can take a long time. The second reason is that there are rumors that hostile governments and bad players are archiving things right now, so that in a few years, when quantum computers are sufficiently powerful, they can decrypt things. So for those reasons, I would strongly encourage you to make that upgrade right now. So I've kind of explained how quantum computing could be used for hacking, but there's a lesser known application in which quantum computers could be used to protect against hacking. And this method is called quantum key distribution. And it's when you transmit quantum data itself. So you don't convert quantum data to classical, you actually send the quantum data itself. And this is usually done using fiber optics or satellites, where they transmit photons, which are kept in a quantum state. It's completely secure because any sort of eavesdropping would require you to measure this quantum data, and that disturbs it. This can be detected. And to better understand this, I'd like to show this video here. So this is a source of entangled qubits. And recall that entanglement means that whatever one qubit is, the other is. So they're in the same state. It's random, but they're in the same state together. And these two qubits are then measured independently by two different measurement devices. We'll call them Alice and Bob. So Alice measures the first qubit in a random direction, and Bob measures his qubit in a random direction. And then they compare notes. So they don't communicate while they're doing this, but then they compare notes. And if they measured in the same direction, they should always get the same result 100% of the time. And that's because of the entanglement. So now Alice and Bob have a secure key, which is known only to them. Now let's redo this using some sort of eavesdropper. We'll call her Eve. So Eve grabs one of the qubits and measures it and then replaces it in that same configuration. So according to classical physics, this is the perfect crime because we would never know the difference because Eve has replaced it in the same configuration. But this is not a classical system, it's a quantum system. And so Eve has broken the entanglement by doing this measurement. And so now when Alice and Bob do their measurements, even if they measure in the same direction, they will not always get the same result. And so now when they compare results, they'll notice a large fraction of the time they get different results. And so this is mathematical proof that there was some sort of eavesdropping or tampering going on. You don't need to just trust that the communication is secure. There's actual mathematical evidence. And so this type of quantum key distribution or QKD network is something that's being developed right now. There are several governments and companies that are starting to deploy this, again, either with fiber optics on the ground or in space using satellites. So to conclude and to give you kind of a forecast of what I think the future will be, right now we do have quantum computers and we have developed post-quantum encryption. I think it'll be 3 years or so before we start to see commercial applications of quantum computing. It could be slightly longer than that, but it's not going to be much longer than that. And we could start to see hacking from quantum computers. I think within 8 years, we will absolutely see commercial applications. In fact, I think quantum computers will be fully integrated into existing technology, and you'll probably be using it without even realizing it. And in 8 years, hacking would be likely from quantum computers. So again, I urge you to upgrade if possible. So that was it for my prepared remarks. My email here is given at the bottom if you'd like to get in touch, but I'm happy to stick around and answer any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark, for your lovely presentation. I think that maybe we have some questions. Es cierto, de nada. ¿Preguntas? Ah, okay.
Nadie?
Well, there is a question from Javier Gomez. He asks if, are you developing, documenting the security risk model framework as well as you do with potential benefits of quantum computing? I read it literally. Do you want to, I could read it again.
Could you translate, please? To make sure I understand.
I think that he's asking about if in the same sense that there is a model about the quantum volume that implies a lot of characteristics of quantum computing. if there is also a model for the business of quantum computing, maybe taking into account investment, budget, reimbursement, etc.
That's a very good question, yes. So we have a model of the science behind quantum computing. The business model is also just emerging because it's very new. It didn't exist commercially a few years ago. So I can speak about our company, first of all. So Cambridge Quantum has developed quantum software for 7 years. And so the compiler we're now giving away for free, but we charge companies to develop quantum applications for them. We usually keep the intellectual property in order to build the applications, but we license the results to our corporate partners so that they can use it in whatever application they want. We're a little bit different from other companies in that we are not a consulting company. So we don't just do a report and then hand it off and say goodbye. So we are really interested in building applications. As I mentioned, we're in the process of merging with Honeywell, who has built quantum hardware, and so they charge for access to that. So companies or groups pay them to use their quantum computer. I'm sure that the business model will have to be adjusted a lot as things emerge. We're now seeing a new quantum startup almost every week. We're seeing literally billions of dollars in investment, and so fortunately, it's now becoming commercially lucrative. But yeah, the business case is not completely determined.
Okay, thank you. There is another question. Should we have a global plan to avoid quantum security attacks? Sooner or later, we will have it, right? The question is from Fabio Grigoriev, I think.
Yes, that's a very good idea. Governments are starting to become increasingly concerned about this, and there is sort of we call it a bit like the Cold War with East versus West, and it's not physical warfare, but it's computer warfare with countries hacking and threatening to hack and such. And so yes, it would be nice to have some sort of agreements and collaboration and truces, but that hasn't really yet happened. We're still sort of in this Cold War standoff, and it's also unclear which countries have actually developed hardware and which are kind of grandstanding and doing things just for promotional scare tactics.
Okay, the next question is for something that is thinking about studying this. I don't know if I can make this question to physicists, but the question is, what degree do you recommend to work in this field? And how do you expect that the quantum software will grow in the next few years?
Yes, so there are tremendous job opportunities in quantum computing. We can't hire fast enough. So if you go to our website, you'll see that we have many openings. We're struggling to hire good people because quantum information science, that's the academic term for this, it didn't exist as a formal degree a few years ago. It's only now that a lot of universities are starting to offer this. So like myself, my background is in physics, specifically string theory and cosmology. So even though I have a PhD in physics, I'm actually on the business side of the company. The people who develop our programs on the scientific team, they usually do have advanced degrees in quantum computing or something very similar, like computational chemistry or something. So I would recommend, if you can, actually get a degree in quantum computing or quantum information science. If you can't, something closely related like physics or mathematics or computer science is very good. Even if you don't intend to actually be a scientist, I would still recommend that you get a degree in this, even if you want to be on the business side, because this is one field where you really do have to know what you're talking about, even to discuss the business side of things. So we really do need smart young people. So I really encourage you to get into.
Okay, I think I get maybe a rather technical question, but the compilers, the quantum compilers that you are providing, I think that there are a lot of limits in space for the programs that can be run because obviously a huge matrix cannot be stored in an actual quantum computer. So how those limits are put into the compiler?
Yes, that's exactly right. In fact, I would even go further. When we use normal computers, we just take for granted that we have RAM, right? We have memory that we can access when we need to. Quantum computers don't yet have quantum RAM or QRAM. Many groups are trying to do this, and we may have it in a few years, but we don't yet have quantum RAM. So what we have to do is, when I showed you that quantum program, we have to initialize the qubits, operate on them, and then measure them all very quickly. There's not time to store it and then come back to it later as we need to. So we have to make the program very small and execute things as quickly as possible. And so that has placed a very severe limit on what we can do. That's why we call it NISQ era. So we have to make the programs as short as possible because anything larger will not work. So yes, that's exactly right. Right now, we don't have that many qubits, and we can't do that many operations on them. In a few years, I think that will be different. Once we do quantum error correction, then we will be able to have more sophisticated programs.
I think that there is another question that nobody wants to ask, but how is the budget for purchasing the IBM machine, for example? I mean, so, IBM sells the chip one with the 49 qubits. The electronics must be purchased separately. So, but do you have an idea of the budget?
I do have an idea of the budget. So first, let me say IBM has done a fantastic job of making publicly available for free a lot of resources. So it's called Qiskit, Qiskit. That's the name of their development platform. And they have done a great job of making a lot of examples and notebooks available for free. And you can access their low-end machines, having 5 qubits or maybe a few more, for free. There may be a bit of a wait because other people are trying to use it, but you can use an actual quantum computer in their laboratory in New York for free. The higher end machines, the one you mentioned with 49 qubits, it is not free. My understanding is that you would need a 3-year contract, which cost about $1 million per year. So it's about a $3 million budget to use their high-end machine, which I realize is probably out of the budget of most of you sitting there. We have a close partnership with IBM, and so we are able to provide access to their high-end machines at a much lower budget. We can give it in increments of 6 months, and you would share it with a few other partners, including us. And so that's much more palatable to many groups' budgets. So yes, the higher-end quantum machines are a bit expensive for.
I don't know. We have time for a last question, or? Okay, I think that maybe another technical question. When was proved that the encryption method based in elliptic curves was quantum breakable? 2 years ago, or?
For elliptic curves, I don't know. For RSA, which is based on the difficulty of factoring large numbers, I think it was 91. I could be wrong, but for some reason I think that. So to explain a little more about that, you might have noticed that if I gave you 2 numbers to multiply, it's easy to do that, right? With a pencil and paper, you know how to multiply numbers and get the result. But if I give you a large number, it's very difficult for you to figure out the 2 prime numbers that you would need to multiply to get that number. And And that's because no one has ever found a fast way to do that. You basically have to guess and check if a number is a factor. And so that's why they use this for RSA encryption, because a computer would have to guess and check every prime number up until the big one. And so, so it turns out that quantum computers are very good at this. And this was realized by someone named Peter Shor, who's kind of one of the grandfathers in quantum computing. He realized many years ago that quantum computers can do the factoring exponentially faster. So even if you give it a large number, quantum computers could do it very efficiently if the quantum computer were sufficiently powerful. So we can't do it today, but in a few years it might be possible.
Okay, do you send it or? Okay. I think so. Yeah. Do you want it? Yeah. Do it. Just do it. There is another question, but the person that got the question wants to ask you personally. Okay.
Okay.
Hi. I want to ask you that you mentioned language processing, but you gave an example in English. How do you handle this problem with other languages?
That's a very good question. Yes, that's true. The only examples I've seen were in English, and that might just be a prejudice because a lot of science is done in English. But I'm sure every language has its own structure, right? There's different rules for grammar and understanding the meaning of a sentence. And so I'm sure that we will also need, for example, Spanish natural language processing, because of course you would speak to Alexa or Siri in Spanish as well. And so, so yes, these areas are also needed.
Okay, thank you. I think that there are not. No, we are in time. Well, we thank again to Mark. Thank you very much for the organizer, for ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you again, and I hope to join you in person next year.
El próximo año. No es un compromiso, pero esperamos que así sea.
Gracias, Mark Johnson. Thank you. Gracias, Omar.
Thank you very much, Mark and Omar. Thank you very much for the participation. That's very good. One recommendation, we are always in the traditional YouTube channel. The CIT week is the channel, Semana Tic is the channel where we are at in YouTube. You can listen to the interpretation in Spanish, but if you want to listen in the original language, we are on Cluster CBA YouTube channel. If you want to listen to it in English, you can listen to it in the Cluster CBA YouTube channel. Now let's move on because we have just started. Mark's presentation was really interesting, and now we have something absolutely interesting which will catch our attention, which is very original. This has to do with innovation, and the title is Fast-Growing Technologies, Companies That Do It Well by Doing Well. This will be in streaming. Peter Witter will be in charge of this presentation with several years of experience in Silicon Valley and product marketing. As a senior product, he worked at the vanguard of computer graphics and video, including 3D video games and high-definition companies like Microsystem. He has been a startup leader on early stages in AI, Internet of Things, and education technology. He has a very wide experience. He had done 3 corporate bankrupts, and he warns that the industry of technology is not for the heart weak. And he got a patent in the US for a design that most of us have used, that was showing a presentation from your portable computer on a screen or TV. He's been a main speaker on the course of technology in the future and for programs of different national governments and global corporations. He writes about the use of fast-growing technologies to solve global challenges on his site, Future Resolve, that is www.futureresolve.com. And his things, his developments and material is very interesting. And after Peter's presentation, we will have a Q&A session by Deborah Slaniski, an Argentine journalist specialized on technology. She got several awards by different institutions like Camera Software and ADEPA, and she's the author of the book of digital transformation. We have the pleasure to have Deborah with us here today, and she will welcome Peter. Welcome, Deborah. A big applause for her, please, so as to give this first kick.
Hi, everybody. I'm happy to be here, so thank you very much to the Córdoba Tech cluster for the to organize this relevant event for the IT industry. So, hello, Peter. How are you? You are mute, I think.
All this technology, and I just have to use it correctly. Hello, Deborah. How are you?
Fine, thank you. It doesn't matter. Well, I know you study the intersection between businesses, technology, and society, so I guess you have a lot of information to share with us. So if you agree, you will have 45 minutes for your talk, and after that, we'll be opening Q&A sessions for around 15 minutes. It's okay?
That's perfect.
Great, so we'll listen to you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Deborah. And thank you all very much for spending your valuable time so that I can share with you my passion for business and technology and impact. My talk today is going to cover several companies that are doing very well as businesses, and they're also having a strong positive impact. We're going to look at some of the principles that they follow to achieve this wonderful dual purpose. This is the dawn of opportunity. I don't think that there has ever been a better time to start a business that will attack very large problems. The companies that we'll look at today are working on problems in energy, food, identity, climate, cybersecurity. Two ideas that we'll see constantly that these companies are able to do is to spot major future trends and to seek billion-person impact. The first trend that I want to look at is something that I'm sure you're all quite familiar with, but it underlies all the advances that we see, and it underlies the opportunity, and that's the tremendous improvement in price and performance in computing. Mark Jackson just spoke to you about what may well be the next generation of advances in computing. But very briefly, let's look at Moore's Law. And Moore's Law was named after Gordon Moore, who was a co-founder of Intel. And in the early 1960s, Gordon Moore projected that effectively the price performance of computing, to put it in general terms, would double every 2 years. Now, Gordon Moore thought that this was going to last for about 10 years. It's lasted for almost 60. And if you do the simple math, you'll see that what we have enjoyed is a 68,000 trillion-fold improvement in the price performance of computing. That's a crazy number. I can't imagine it. And human beings actually have a hard time imagining more than a set of about 7. So I try to put it into physical world terms. Suppose we had a Moore's Law Volkswagen Beetle. Take a 1971 Volkswagen Beetle and suppose that its price performance had increased according to Moore's Law. Well, then by the middle of the last decade, you would be able to go from Córdoba to the moon in about 45 minutes. So you could commute from Córdoba to the moon. And you could do that because it would take you less than half a liter of petrol to get there. And you would pay about 4 US cents to have that Moore's Law Volkswagen Beetle. So you can see the incredible improvement that we have had in price performance of computing, and that underlies an amazing acceleration in discoveries and the convergence of these technological discoveries. So we have had advances in big data, in digital biology, in networking and communications, in material science, I think I'll need to move here, in artificial intelligence. And here's an example of facial recognition using deep learning. Well, that same algorithms or style of algorithms are now used to solve protein folding problems that will give us wonderful new medical treatments. They're being used to do weather prediction. It's the convergence of these technologies that is so powerful. If you take artificial intelligence and sensors and networks and communications and material science and robotics, you don't get the Moore's Law Volkswagen, but you will get a completely self-driving car. The opportunities abound. Business is accelerated as well, as those of you who are in business understand. I'm sitting here, my whole career, as the introduction noted, has been in Silicon Valley. Funding is now global. We used to have something in Silicon Valley that we called the 20-minute rule. And that's where venture capitalists preferred to invest in companies that were headquartered within 20 minutes of their own office, so they could have good communication and there was good transparency. Well, that's all gone. Funding is now global. Your talent pool is global. And Mark Jackson noted the challenges in trying to find people who have the training and the ability to make advances in quantum computing. He's looking globally. And I'm sure all of you have worked remotely, have collaborated with colleagues remotely, have collaborated with colleagues, even hired people internationally in the past year and a half. Learning is global. Here I am. I'm in my house. I'm 15 miles south of San Francisco, and I'm speaking with you in Córdoba and with people in a broader global audience. That is also an example of a global customer base. So with all these opportunities, with all the tools available to us, with all the connections, all the talent that we have available to us, I think the real question is, what problem do you want to solve? And each of the companies we'll look at, you'll see that they started by saying, hey, we want to solve this big problem. One of my favorite sayings about this approach comes from my old colleague, Peter Diamandis, who's the co-founder of Singularity University. And I like this saying so much that I'll repeat it. And it is, if you want to make $1 billion, figure out how you're going to help 1 billion people. Now, before we get into these specific companies, I do want to give some advice, just 2 pieces of advice, because I've been through many startup companies, a lot of failures, a couple of successes, and I want to share with you and maybe break some myths about what it is to start a new venture. My first piece of advice: attack problems that you're really passionate about. You really have to have a fire inside you to go solve that problem. And the reason is that this is not just a job. I could tell you the stories about Christmas morning, 7:30 a.m. with my family gathered around and a major customer calling me from Asia demanding a conference call that you have to take because it's your business. I could tell stories about the 4 a.m. Conference calls. We actually built an office in my house next to our bedroom because I would be getting up in the middle of the night to go and make calls. And that's what it is. It's a lifestyle. The other reason you have to be passionate is you're going to keep getting knocked down. And when it's your business, you can't stop. You have to keep getting up. And you will have setbacks. One of my favorite athletes, Sugar Ray Leonard, says this about his own career. And I think that's very true about trying to go out and tackle these huge problems. The second piece of simple advice really comes from my own experience. I'm an engineer. I was trained as an engineer. I started out in R&D, and I love technologies. And still to this day, it's easy for me to get lost in the tech if I don't bring myself back to being a business person and focus on the needs, especially if you're going to go leveraging accelerating technologies. Say you decide to go into quantum computing. Don't get lost in the tech. A business succeeds by meeting needs, by solving problems. Focus on the needs, because I've made that mistake too many times to count. So let's dive in and let's look at a need. Here's a billion-person need that I think we all agree about: energy. This is the heart of industrialization and of development of economies. Looking at the major trend, we are going to need at least 50% more energy in 25 years than we have available to us today. Not only that, but another key trend is that renewables will be the fastest growing share. And renewables will be the fastest growing share, not only because of increasing concern about climate change, but also because energy is a commodity, and the most important factor in a commodity is cost. And renewables just cost less. They, especially wind and solar, they're the lowest cost form of energy. They have a huge problem, and that's storage. If the sun is not shining, or here, this picture was taken, this is about an hour and a half from my home, and I'm sorry that I'm covering the headline. My state of California gets about 11% of its energy from hydropower, and we had to shut down significant pieces of hydropower last month because we're in a drought and the rivers aren't flowing as much. Storage is essential. And so here's a company, ESS, founded and headquartered in Wilsonville, Oregon. Should mention as a side note, none of the companies that I will talk about were founded in Silicon Valley, and none of them are headquartered in Silicon Valley. Innovation and this type of creativity, it is global now, as you'll see. So founded in Wilsonville, Oregon, with a very forward-looking approach. They looked at a future trend. They saw a billion-person need, and they said, we're going to deliver low-cost, environmentally friendly, high-capacity storage for utilities. And the approach they take is a type of battery called a flow battery, and they base it on iron. I won't get into the details, but it's elegant. It's iron, electrolytes, and water that can store tremendous amounts of energy. They've gone to utilities with a powerful value proposition. These are good businessmen. They see their customers' needs, and the value proposition to the owners of utilities is powerful and simple. We're going to provide you lower cost, lower emissions, and better service, more reliable, more consistent service. And it's quite successful. Here's a simple example that they use for solar companies of the importance of storage. Here is solar energy generated during the day. If you have no storage, then this energy, which is captured during the brightest parts of the day, is lost. As the sun goes down, you must use other forms, and it's typically fossil fuels that are used, typically natural gas or even diesel, to make the difference. With storage, that energy is captured, it's released during the later peak hours. Here's the demand curve, and it saves cost, it saves tremendous amounts of emissions. It just makes sense. This is a contract that ESS recently won just over in Chile, in Patagonia. They have won a deal with Grupo Saiza to provide storage for a run-of-river hydroelectric plant. And here's their value proposition. 12 years of diesel emissions will be eliminated over the 25 years of this project. And compared to other battery technologies, lithium ion being a competing technology, that's lithium ion obviously is what's used in cars, they'll save $3 million. ESS is doing extremely well. Early in their development, they had a very high quality corporate investment and very sophisticated. They were able to attract very sophisticated venture investment. Recently, they announced that they're going public with a valuation of greater than $1 billion. And this is a huge business achievement. I want to draw a clear distinction here between a unicorn and a public company, because I'm sure you've all heard of unicorns, and there are hundreds and hundreds of them now. A unicorn is a company that is private. It is still taking venture investment, and it's valued at $1 billion based on the latest venture capital that was put into it. In many ways, it's a theoretical valuation. It's a paper valuation. Going public's a different world, and I've been with a company that's gone public. It is a completely different scenario. This becomes a liquid asset. It is real money in a real market, and there are much greater real demands that the public puts on you. So this is a tremendous achievement that ESS has enjoyed and earned. Look at another billion-person need: food and climate. We, of course, we all need to eat. We all need to breathe. There will be another 2 billion people on the planet in 25 years. How do you meet the food and climate needs for them? It's an unimaginably complex problem with so many challenges to it. As a business person, when I look at large problems and numerous large problems, I see a lot of opportunities. One of the opportunities in this massive problem is measurement. How do you measure globally the factors that go into agriculture? How do you measure soil, water, pesticide use, pests? How do you measure energy? How do you measure climate? Measurement is fundamental to improving anything. Well, one of the increasingly effective ways to do it is with satellites. And here's the first satellite. This is Sputnik. I'm sure most of you recognize it. It's about just a bit bigger than a football, a little smaller than a basketball. Sputnik launched in 1957. it took the resources of one of the greatest superpowers in world history to put this into orbit, and all it did was beep a transmission every few seconds. This is something that's followed Moore's law. The convergence of technologies, the computing, the material science, the communications, the avionics. Today, startups can launch constellations of satellites. And one of the best of these startups comes from Argentina, Satellogic. Ironically, or perhaps logically, one of Satellogic's two Argentine founders came from a 20-year history in the information technology business. He understood the explosive growth of computing and communications very well, and the convergence of technologies. He understood that very well. And he said, that's where satellites are going, and we can solve a lot of problems with that. You can see where they're located, not founded in Silicon Valley, not located in Silicon Valley. They have, so I'm sure you're familiar with the company because they have R&D right there in Córdoba, headquarters in Montevideo in Uruguay. The problem they decided to solve in measurement of the factors of agriculture and energy and climate was to measure every square foot of the earth every day. And they looked forward and they projected the trends and they said, yeah, we can do that. The benefits of being able to do this are profound. And so you can see the problems that can be solved when you can measure daily and at high precision. They went to their prospective customers, and who would be their customers? They would be major agricultural companies, insurance companies, crop insurance companies, energy companies, national governments, international organizations. And they had an elegant value proposition. We can give you very timely, accurate, and cost-effective measurement down to very precise levels. And look at the problems you can solve. Irrigation, crop health, soil and tillage, pest detection. You can do pipeline monitoring for energy companies. They can even count trees. So if you're thinking of tracking deforestation, land use, forest health, they can count individual trees. They can do fire detection in remote areas. A significant number of benefits that they offer. And because they understood the right benefits to offer, and because they executed very well, they are doing extremely well. As of June, they have 17 satellites in orbit. They announced that they are going public, and they're being sponsored by one of Wall Street's most credible and prestigious investment banks. And they too will have a real market, real money value over $1 billion. This company's doing extremely well by solving these important problems. They're also kind of near and dear to my heart because we have two daughters, and one of Satellogic's traditions is naming their satellites after famous female scientists and mathematicians. So they've named satellites Mary, or Marie for Marie Curie, Hypatia for the great Alexandrian mathematician and scientist, Ada for Ada Lovelace, who was the first computer programmer. So I like this company for many, many reasons. Here's a satellite image that was not taken by Satellogic, but was taken by NASA satellite. And this was taken in October of last year of Western Argentina, right in your area. And I'm sure many of you can remember the wildfires that happened. And the red areas are wildfires, and you can see the smoke coming from these wildfires. This is where I live. And this is, we'll never forget this day. This is September 9th, 2020. This picture is not enhanced in any way. This is what it looked like at 12 noon because of wildfires that were raging about 50 miles away. Now, 8 million people live in the greater San Francisco Bay Area, and the economy of this area would be alone the 19th largest in the world. This would be a G20 economy. Argentina, also a G20 economy with wildfires as a significant problem. I believe that wildfire management is a billion-person need, and this is only getting worse. It has become literally 10x more significant, 10x worse in just the last 40 years. Well, a company has been formed out of a university incubator in Lincoln, Nebraska. This formed at the University of Nebraska, the company Drone Amplified. They decided that they were going to attack the problem of wildfires and wildfire management. And the piece of the problem they decided to address is setting prescribed burns. That is, in front of an advancing wildfire, firefighters will set a fire that they can control so that when the wildfire reaches that burned area, it's stopped. Or before fires even start, they burn out excess fuel in areas safely and under control so that wildfires will be prevented in those areas. This is a group, again, from a university incubator, and Córdoba has such marvelous universities, and it's such an entrepreneurial community. I hope that this resonates with you. What they did was a convergence of avionics and robotics and sensors and communications, material science, chemistry, and computing. They developed literally a flying robot that sets backfires. And what you have, I'll describe quickly, it's a drone with a hopper with little golf ball size spheres, and there are chemicals in the spheres. The robot injects another chemical into the sphere and lets it go. About 30 seconds later, it bursts into flames. And so you can set backfires that way. Now, if any of you have like young boys, 9 or 10-year-old boys, go home and tell them that today you learned about a drone that flies around dropping fireballs. I think they'll have fun with that concept. But this business is quite serious. This is an image from Drone Amplified's application, and here is a firefighter controlling a drone. The firefighter is able to prescribe a path for the drone. It follows it. In this case, it's going along ridges where it will set a backfire in front of. This red line is an advancing wildfire, and it also can set up boundaries for the drone. The value proposition is so crisp. Their customers are firefighting agencies, and the firefighting agencies at the top of their list of needs is keep the firefighters safe. And you can see clearly what the value proposition is. Your firefighters will be safe. We can save tremendous cost. We can cover more area. We're incredibly precise because of the communications and avionics technologies that we are using. And we can fly any time of day. We can fly in smoke, we can fly at night when all other aircraft have to be grounded. They are doing very well. They have, in just 6 years, now they have 100 units deployed in the field in 4 different countries. And when you think about it, that 100 units, it might not seem like a lot, but imagine the situation they work with. This is literally a life and death business. They're fighting horrific wildfires. And so 4 countries, 100 units out in these incredibly high stakes situations, now fully approved. is the only drone approved by the United States Forest Service, and they recently won a major contract with the United States Forest Service. It's a tremendous success. I'm going to cover two more needs and companies that are addressing them. Another billion-person need is identity and having authentic identity and authentic records. The World Bank shows that over 1 billion people in the world do not have proper identification. And worse than that, half of the women in developing nations lack official identity. It took me a little bit to really internalize this problem, because it's never been a problem for me. I'm quite privileged. This hasn't been an issue. But think about it. If you don't have identification, you can't get a bank account. You can't get a job. You can't get a credit card. You can't go to school. Your life is severely limited. Looking at a piece of this huge problem, academic records, there's such a great need. Many universities honestly do not trust records that come from certain areas, that come from certain schools, because of the history of potential lack of authenticity. Records, paper records especially, are easily lost, destroyed. They can be altered. Imagine if a young person in a developing nation has first had the opportunity to go to school, so his or her family has sacrificed greatly, and that young person has worked through school and gotten good grades, only to come at the end and face yet another hurdle where the records are questioned. I think all of humankind loses out on the creativity and intelligence of that young person. Blockchains are a fantastic tool for creating fully transparent, fully visible, authentic records. One of the leading companies in the blockchain world is Input Output, or IOHK. They are the co-developer and co-owner of the Cardano blockchain. Cardano is the third largest blockchain after Bitcoin and Ethereum. It was released in 2017, and it was a very forward-looking development. For one, they purposely designed it to avoid the problem of energy use that persists with Bitcoin and with the original Ethereum. And they also focused not so much on a cryptocurrency, but on the problem of authentic records and authentic contracts. Last year, they struck a deal with the Ministry of Education in Ethiopia, and they are developing a blockchain tool on Cardano to keep academic records for all of Ethiopia's students. And they're starting with a rollout next year for 5 million secondary school students. The students will be able to access their records through a digital key anywhere in the world, anytime. They'll also be able to grant access to anyone at any time. And so companies who are looking to hire them, universities who are looking to admit them, will be able to see a fully transparent, unalterable, highly authentic academic record. Now, the Cardano blockchain and IOHK are doing very well. I will state up front that a large part of this valuation, of course, comes because of the current euphoria around cryptocurrencies. But the main purpose of the Ada coin, and there we go again, Ada Lovelace, back to great female scientists. The ADA coin was developed primarily to make high quality contracts and records available for billions of people. And sophisticated investors and the smart industry watchers look and say, okay, these guys are really on the right track. There is a very long-term, solid value proposition and business available here. The last thing I'll talk about is with blockchains keeping our records, our digital records, authentic and transparent. Cybersecurity is a problem that plagues everyone. How many of you have medical records online? How many of you do your banking online? How many of you do professional communication and have your professional credentials and records right there online on LinkedIn? A very good friend of mine who's a very senior executive with a global engineering firm had his LinkedIn account hacked and stolen 2 years ago. You can imagine the trauma that involves. Even the most capable internet companies get hacked. These are all recent victims of fairly high-profile hacks. And my favorite one is our own, here in the United States, our Department of Homeland Security. Now, this is the government department that is set up to protect me and my fellow citizens from foreign bad guys coming into the country and doing us harm. Well, the bad guys came into the country and they got into the Department of Homeland Security's own computer system and started causing havoc there. This problem will last forever. The criminals will always be there. And there are so many companies. This is such a vibrant area that even leading journal in cybersecurity, Cybercrime Magazine, they can't even narrow it down to a few companies. They list 150 of the top companies for 2021. The market is enormous. $1 trillion will be spent over a 4-year period. That will only grow. The amount of venture capital that has gone into fighting cybercrime just this year is enormous. $12 billion just this year invested in companies fighting cybercrime. So where do you go if you want to find a big problem to solve, to build a business around? One place, since we're coming up on the United Nations General Assembly in New York soon, is the UN's own Sustainable Development Goals. Look inside these. Inside each one, you will find numerous opportunities to solve problems for 1 billion people. But as I noted earlier, it is so important to find one that you're really passionate about, because it is so hard to start a new endeavor. Find one that really speaks to you. With all the talent available, all the tools available, all the opportunities available, find something that you can build a fantastic business around that will help all of humanity. So I will stop there. I think I've used a little bit less than 45 minutes, and I love Q&A. So,
yes, we
Deborah,
are here. I'm here. So, firstly, I want to know, well, thanks for talking about Satellogic, which is an Argentinian startup. But do you think in this turbulent context that we have here in Argentina, can we have a lot of Satellogic companies, or this is just one exception?
I do not think it's an exception. Now, certainly the situation economic situation in Argentina has challenges, but the opportunity to do things outside of Silicon Valley continually becomes easier and easier because you have access to funding on a global basis. You have access to talent on a global basis. Might it be more difficult? Perhaps. I'm not an expert in trying to start a business in Argentina. Is it possible? Is Satellogic the one and only exception? No. So it is certainly possible. And I think that it will be increasingly possible as the paradigm of working across borders, working remotely, and having global teams, global funding, global customers becomes increasingly established.
Thank you. And you said about the real question should be, what problem do you want to solve? You said in one of the first slides. So do you think that the humanity is asking the right questions, or we are losing the focus?
Let me answer with a question so that I make sure I understand your interest. When you say, is humanity asking the right questions, in which context? In an economic context, in a social context, in a business context?
Okay. Here, Germán Gazzoni from ASHI Group want to know, do you think that in the near future, could it be possible to identify people outside of government records?
Let me rephrase the question to make sure I understand. That the question is, will it be possible for there to be authentic identification that is not a government identification?
I guess so. Yes.
I haven't thought about that question, but my first thought is, yeah, sure. Now, social identities cannot be trusted because it's so easy to set up a fake social identity. But I could see an opportunity for a company or an organization to use something like a blockchain to create authentic, indelible, highly searchable records where people could put their trusted identity.
Great. Here, Agustina Perez y Carolina Salcedo have a question, and this is, what a billion people's problem are you passionate about?
Well, I'll speak very personally. I am really interested, for many reasons, in the needs of persons who have cognitive disabilities, whether they are developmental disabilities or acquired disabilities. This is maybe 15% of the people in the world. And I am afraid that they are left behind and increasingly left behind through inability to access the tools that the rest of us have. I worry about cultural stigma that they face. And this is an area where I've spent quite a bit of time. So that is the first billion-person need that really comes to me.
And I think we should use artificial intelligence for these challenges, no? What do you think?
Certainly could. And these are very complex problems. But for example, I'll give you a simple example of how artificial intelligence may in fact be used already. If a person has a language disability, And so it's very difficult for them to express themselves properly. Even though everything else is fine, their reasoning, their thinking, their deduction, all fine, expressing themselves. We have tools now, and I've watched young adults use these tools where when they're typing an email, they have their grammar and language automatically corrected, recommendations made. There are several pretty amazing tools for sentence completion. And so I agree with you, and I can see examples already.
Great. Here, Javier Gomez want to know, what percentage of businesses and investors are focused in doing well, for example, sustainable objectives, when doing businesses versus traditional business model?
Could you repeat the question? I want to make sure that
yes,
that I'm properly understanding the question.
If there's increasing the number of companies that is working in doing well instead of earn money as the traditional model.
Oh, okay. You'll go out of business. So it's very, very hard. If honestly speaking, if your main focus is more charitable, then being a nonprofit is probably the better path. The examples that I gave, and what's really fascinating to me, is businesses that are run as businesses. And I look at ESS and Satellogic and Drone Amplified, and they are so good at the basics of business, of understanding value propositions, understanding customer needs, understanding how to add value. And what they have done is chosen problems that have a great social benefit, and they've built businesses around that. These are profitable, sustainable businesses, and they do it by being really good business people. And that's how they achieve the dual purpose.
Yes, earn money as a consequence of a lot of good things.
Pick the right problem, focus on the customer needs, and the two can happen.
Great. Guillermo want to know about it. You talk about focus on needs, not technology. What do you think is the best approach to find the correct needs that fit in a market? I think there's a billion need, but unfortunately, not all works like a successful business.
That's so true, and honestly, that's one of the reasons that so many startups fail. Is and I've written about this. You have the wrong timing, or you've missed the cost point for a market. I'll tell you what has worked well for me, and that is, instead of having your idea and then spending time and money developing a complete solution, try to experiment very rapidly. Do a mock-up of your idea. Do a paper presentation of your idea and take it out to the potential customers for it. Invest the minimum amount of time and money needed to get a good enough example of your solution in front of the people who you think will be the customers. And they'll tell you pretty fast if you've got a good idea or if your idea is not very good.
Well, some minutes ago, you said you are passionate about working for the people with disabilities. Now, Agustina Perez y Carolina Salcedo want to know if you are working on a project about this need.
I'm not working on a product or a company right now. I am about to start doing a podcast, hosting a podcast for a company in British Columbia called ABI Wellness. And they've developed a tremendous set of therapies for people with traumatic brain injury. And so I should be starting those podcasts by the end of this year. Again, cognitive disabilities are so challenging, and there are so many amazing potential solutions, both therapies and devices that can help them. One of the companies that I love to follow is an Elon Musk company, and I've written about this company, Neuralink, a couple of times in my Future Resolve blog. Neuralink and several other companies are trying to solve the problem of actually measuring what's going on inside the brain. And it comes back to, if you want to understand something, you need to be able to measure it. They are developing very sophisticated measurement and communication systems that can be used to understand what is happening differently in the brain of a person who thinks differently, who has a cognitive impairment.
Yes, I wrote an article about Neuralink, and I interviewed some scientists about this topic, and they told me that we know nothing about the brain to improve this kind of solution. So we have to wait some years maybe to find out a good solution for
I
this
agree.
kind of people.
Oh, I agree with you fully. We have literally just seen the very tip of the iceberg. Isn't it fascinating that everything we perceive about the world happens in our brain, and we have no idea how it happens?
Well, fascinated, but dangerous, I think, because imagine that
Troubling.
all your dreams are your point of view are in a Word or in a PC, and you are hacked. So
that's I try to think positively, but yeah.
No, because you also talk about cybersecurity, and you know that cybersecurity attacks are increasing year by year. Do you think we should have to say, well, this kind of industry will be here forever, or maybe we'll find a solution against this one day?
I believe it will be here forever because criminals have been here forever. My colleague, one of my old colleagues, Mark Goodman, wrote an outstanding book on cybercrime, and he's worked for Interpol. It's called Future Crimes. And if you look at organized crime, criminals are smart. Why physically walk into a bank and rob it when you can sit in a basement somewhere outside of a country and rob it that way? I think that, unfortunately, think of athletics and drug doping, where the dopers always try to be a step ahead of the analysis tools, and it's always a game of trying to get ahead. I think that it will forever be a contest between those trying to attack our digital identity and our digital assets and those trying to protect us. I suppose the positive thing in that is if you're a computer science student today and you want to have a very long-term career in solving big, important problems, cybersecurity is a fantastic field to go into.
Yes, and I agree with you. And of course, this kind of criminals are using also the exponential technologies, not for good, but for earn money. So
they're smart.
Yes, yes. So, well, thank you very much, Peter, for your time and for sharing your knowledge with us. You have been talking about a lot of topics, so thank you very much. And please, we say goodbye to you with a loud applause. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you very, very much.
So now let's move on. Deborah, thank you very much again. For those of you who are logging in now, in the second half of the day, please let me remind you that we are broadcasting through streaming with a YouTube channel with the TIC in Spanish and in cluster CBA in the original language. So you have two options, no excuses. You can send messages to your friends. You can follow us via streaming. Here we are on Holiday Inn Hotel with 100 people. And now we will listen to a woman, and she will talk about biotechnology. And the title is How Women Will Program the Future of Life. Let's now invite Tiffany Voda, who's a doctor in physics and non-resident member of Geotech of Atlantic Council and a member and vice president on Biology University in Singularity University. She has a licentiate and a BA in chemistry in the University of New York and a doctor's degree in molecular biology in Princeton University. Dr. Voda worked in the pharmaceutical industry. She has been on the American University of El Cairo, and she's been a teacher of bioengineering in Stanford University. She founded 2 companies focused on communication strategies for scientists and experts. She works as a consultant in several companies. She's a member of the Women's Homeware Bank project, and she's part of the leading team of the Space Humanity Lab. Let's invite once again Deborah Sloniski to start her presentation, How Women Will Program the Future of Life.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, and thank you so much for inviting me to join you today from my home in California. Thank you as well for enabling me to speak English during our conversation today. My Spanish is pretty good, but it's not science good, so I'm just delighted to be here with you all today. And as we just heard in that great introduction, today we're going to be talking about biotechnology and how women are taking a leading role in programming the future of life. Now, it has felt the last year and a half like a deluge of bad news. I'm sure you've been feeling this as well. But there's going to be good news coming because the world is changing. I want to make sure that you are looking at what I'm looking at. Perfect. Okay, the world is changing because the boundaries between living things and technology are starting to break down. We are entering a new era in which the living parts of you are accessible to ever cheaper, ever faster, ever more powerful technology, computers, sensors, and even more than that. Today, we're in an era where the biology is increasingly being the technology. And I want you to remember that message as I'm telling you tell you about this framework that's called the Digital Biology Framework. And so to start out there, just in case you don't spend every day thinking about biology like I do, just as a quick review, all life on Earth is related, and all life on Earth, including you, is made of cells. Living thing stores what you can think of as its operating manual. We call that the genome. It's a collection of DNA that's basically the operating instructions for building and then running that living thing. Those instructions are organized into groups called chromosomes. Now in humans, we have 23 pairs of these chromosomes. That's where the famous company name 23andMe comes from. So now let's think about just one of those operating manuals, just one of those chromosomes. And if we zoom in even further to that chromosome, we get down to the level of the famous DNA double helix. It's a chemical molecule that's made up of 4 chemical building blocks that, for short, we call A, C, T, and G. And those A, C's, T's, and G's are the coding system of life. It's the coding language of life. Computers store information as zeros and ones. Living things on Earth store information as A, C, T, and G. Now your genome, the human genome, has about 3 billion of these A, C's, T's, and G's. And it's the order that stores the information because there's only 4 letters in that alphabet. And it turns out that 99.9% of your DNA is exactly identical to the DNA of every other human being on Earth. It's the 0.1% of those A's, C's, T's, and G's that make you, you, and make me, me. So as I think you can see, knowing that order of those A's, C's, T's, and G's is really, really important for all kinds of industries today, for health and medicine, for agriculture, for energy, and as you're going to see in a little bit, also for some really exciting applications that are starting to come down the line. Now, you may remember from school that the 2 men who shared the Nobel Prize for this discovery of the structure of DNA were named James Watson and Francis Crick. But what you might not know is that Francis Crick and Jim Watson and Morris Wilkins shared that Nobel Prize for solving the structure of DNA in 1963. But they never would have been able to do it without a photograph that was taken by this woman. This is Dr. Rosalind Franklin. She was an absolutely brilliant X-ray crystallographer. X-ray crystallographers take molecules, they bombard them with X-rays, and then they use really fancy mathematics to figure out what is the shape of that molecule. Well, one day, Dr. Franklin was giving a talk about her work. She showed this picture, and sure enough, Watson was in the audience. And the second he saw this photograph, he knew that DNA had to be a helix. That was the key breakdown. Now, 10 years later, when Watson and Crick won the Nobel Prize, they shared it with Morris Wilkins, Rosalind Franklin's boss, not Rosalind Franklin, because she had already died. And it turns out you can't win a Nobel Prize if you're dead. So this is a woman who has been called the Dark Lady of DNA. I'm showing you my copy of this book that is a biography of Dr. Rosalind Franklin. And it's really important, I think, to know her story, because what we see over and over is that women make really important contributions to the sciences and to the life sciences, but sometimes they're overlooked by the systems that we have in place. So going back to this idea of digital biology and the source code of our DNA, that means when I think about DNA, I'm not actually thinking about a helix, I'm thinking about source code. I'm thinking like this. And this is really powerful because anything that we can do with DNA code is the same type of thing that we can do with computer code. And I want you to remember that because we're going to come back to this idea in a little bit, DNA as code. But you might be asking yourself, okay, so there's all this digitized DNA information out there. Where does it come from? The answer is it comes from a set of technologies that are called DNA sequencing technologies. And it turns out that DNA sequencing is a beautiful example of an exponential technology. So here, what I'm showing you is the price performance curve of DNA sequencing. Now, this is a semi-log plot, so the y-axis is a log scale, That's why Moore's law here is a straight gray line. So you might remember back in 2001, that was when the draft of the human genome was published simultaneously by a government group called the Human Genome Project, and also by a private company called Celera Genomics. And back in 2001, just to get that draft of the human genome, it cost about 2.1 billion US dollars. You can see then that the price performance of DNA sequencing then approximately followed Moore's law until 2008, when two things happened. A different type of chemistry was invented for the DNA sequencing, and the computation changed. The computers got much more powerful and started analyzing the data in a different way. And once that happened, you can see after 2008 that the price performance of DNA sequencing radically outperformed Moore's law, all the way down to 2019, which is the last year we have really good data for, when the cost of sequencing a human genome had dropped to 900 US dollars. Now, as a reminder, in my country, in the United States, 900 US dollars is cheaper than an X-ray costs. So that says a lot about a lot of things, and it tells us just how transformative this technology is poised to be. Because in the space of 20 years, we went from DNA sequencing of a human genome costing as much as a fighter jet to costing the same amount as 2 VIP tickets to a Taylor Swift concert. Huge, huge change. And in fact, we think that in the next few years, that price is going to go down even further, where the consumers are going to be paying about 100 US dollars, but the marginal price, the price to the company that's doing that, is going to be pennies on the dollar, meaning that it could be cheaper to get my DNA sequenced than to flush my toilet here in California. That's pretty remarkable. On top of that, the machines have changed a lot. So I'm showing you here a picture of a DNA sequencer from 2001. It was about the size of a refrigerator and cost about 1 million US dollars. Now, today, 20 years later, we still have refrigerator-sized DNA sequencers that cost $1 million. They are way more powerful than they used to be. But we also have DNA sequencers that look like this. This is a handheld DNA sequencer from a company called Oxford Nanopore in the in the UK, Oxford Nanopore. And that handheld DNA sequencer plugs into a laptop. Now, there's another version of this called the Smidge Ion that actually interfaces with your smartphone. So what that means is, in theory, you could have a DNA sequencer anywhere where you have a pocket, a little bit of electricity, and an internet connection. Really radically transforming things. And we've seen how important this has been during our COVID pandemic. And what this suggests is that we are coming up on a radical shift in healthcare, also in agriculture and in lots of other verticals. But healthcare is interesting because right now, today, you basically wait until you get sick to go to the doctor. You wait until you have headaches or your vision is changing before you go to the doctor. Your doctor does an MRI and she finds a tumor for you. What I'm trying to tell you is that with these various biotechnologies, which unfortunately we don't have a lot of time to talk about today, but together what they're doing is moving us into an era where we can switch from sick care to true healthcare, data-driven, highly personalized, predictive and preventive care that comes based on actionable insights from our own bodies. Now, there's amazing examples of this all over the place. I want to tell you one about a company called Grail. So back in 2013, one of the big DNA sequencing companies, it's still out there, it's a company called Illumina, was running a set of experiments where they had a pathologist, their director of the lab, was looking at the blood of pregnant women, and she was using it to try to design a test for fetal abnormalities in the pregnant women so that you wouldn't have to do an amniocentesis to see if there was something wrong with the baby. And instead, what this pathologist saw was DNA fingerprints that made her suspect that some of these pregnant women actually had cancer. And sure enough, that was the case. And this woman went on to found a company called Grail, spun out of Illumina, and it was recently, just a couple of months ago, bought back by Illumina for $7 billion US dollars. Now, here's why I'm telling you this story today. Just a couple of months ago, as Grail put out an article talking about this great story of their founder and they didn't even use her name. So I'm going to say her name for all of you now. This was Dr. Meredith Hawks Miller, who was the pathologist who was looking at the DNA data and said, wait a minute, there's something strange, there's something else going on here. Nobody else wanted to listen to her, but she persisted. And sure enough, this turned out to be a billion-dollar idea that could potentially radically change how we do testing for cancer. And this was the correction that Grail printed later, because actually Dr. Hawks Miller's daughter said, wait a minute, you didn't even say my mom's name. And she's the one who did all this work. And so Grail did apologize for having left her name out of the original story. So it turns out that digitization has happened for more than just DNA. We can actually digitize a great deal of biological information. And I want to draw your attention to just one of those things, which is proteins. So I told you that DNA is the information storage molecule in our bodies in all living things. Well, proteins are the molecules that actually do things. They carry out the instructions of the DNA. They're incredibly important. And the way that each of these proteins has a particular function is because of the protein's structure. So if we know the structure, then we know something about the function. And so for many, many, many years, one of the most important things you could do as a molecular biologist or a biochemist was to solve the structure of a protein. And that could take you all 6 years of your PhD, just solving for one molecule. Well, you might remember late last year, the company DeepMind published an algorithm called AlphaFold that was able to solve computationally, an AI could solve the structure of a protein that previously it was taking humans years and years in order to do. And just a couple of months ago, another team at the University of Washington published another algorithm that's able to do this as well. And so now what we see is just in the last couple of months, these gigantic databases with more than 300,000 protein structures in them that were solved by an AI. And I think what's most exciting about this is not only are these data open source, but the algorithms are too. So I think of this type of technology not as going to be taking the jobs as scientists, but instead of giving us superpowers. I can't tell you the number of labs who woke up in the morning, saw this news, and instantly went to go download that software because they knew this was a superpower. And so that brings us to another point that I want to make today, which is as we're moving into this era where computers are giving us more and more of these superpowers to do great work, including great science, it is so, so important that we teach our girls to code. If you only take one thing away from this talk today, it's that. Teach our girls and our women to code, because this is the real frontier and where we're going to be seeing amazing progress in biotechnology, life sciences, agriculture. We're going to be using these superpowers from computers. So I just told you a bit about how biotechnology and molecules are coming together to have some really fantastic innovations. Let's zoom out now and look at cells, because we can also be using cells as the building blocks of technology. Let's look at just one example of that. So think about your food, right? Our food, our protein, our meat, our fish comes from living things that are killed and then we eat them. But instead, there is a whole new movement going on where what folks are doing now is taking some of those cells from a living animal, you don't have to kill the animal to do this, growing them in giant tanks like the ones that we would use to make beer. And then what you get is lab-grown meat. This is also known as cellular agriculture. It's an incredibly exciting innovation space that is coming very close to market, so you should keep your eyes open. And it's exciting because it means that we are able to get the nutritional and frankly the enjoyment of eating the foods that we are used to eating and that taste really delicious to us, but without torturing and killing billions of animals and without having the massive environmental footprint that we know industrial agriculture has. This has the potential to be win-win. And I can even imagine a future in which we do this cellular agriculture on the counters in our own kitchens, not even just in giant warehouses all over. And when I think about exciting things like going to Mars or other planets, I think about this as well as being a really empowering technology. Now, I first truly understood the potential impact of cellular agriculture when I went to a talk that was given by this woman, Dr. Sylvia Earle. Dr. Sylvia Earle is a National Geographic explorer in residence, and she was the former head of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration in the United States, the first woman to run that position. And Dr. Earle really made me understand that if we are serious about protecting our oceans and protecting our planet for our children and their children and their children, then the way we make our food really has to change. And cellular agriculture is a great way to do that. And so as Dr. Earle pointed out, never before in all of human history has there been greater opportunity or need for young women in science and engineering and in all human endeavors. Women are going to be crucial to this moving forward. So now we can zoom out one more step and say, well, what happens when we take biotech and we try to make whole living organisms with them? Now, remember, we talked about AI not too long ago, and we're going to come back to AI here. 2020 was a disaster of the year, and I want to tell you about my favorite scientific study that came out in 2020, and it was this one. This was a study where a group of researchers decided that they were going to ask an AI, train an AI, in order to design living robots. And they said, okay, AI, you get 2 building blocks. One building block that holds still and one building block that can move. Now give us designs for building a robot that will move with only these 2 kinds of building blocks. And if you program your AI right, it does exactly what you ask it to do. And so this AI returned a bunch of these plans for making these moving robots out of only 2 building blocks. And then the researchers went, they chose some of these plans, and they went and they got 2 types of cells from frogs, as it turns out. One type of cell was a cardiomyocyte. So that's the cell that makes the heart beat. That was the moving cell. And then the other kind of cell was ectoderm, which is a cell that doesn't move the same way. And then they built little tiny cellular robots based on the AI plan. And when they did this, sure enough, these little robots, which they named xenobots, moved the way that the AI predicted that it was. And again, all we did was take 2 biological building blocks, put that together with the superpower of AI, and we have now living robots. It's really very exciting. I can't wait to see what comes from this research. I think it's a really exciting field, and I can't wait to see what xenobots do. So let's go back to our digital biology paradigm, because it turns us into engineers of life, not just observers. So for example, we can move great big blocks of code around. That's called genetic engineering, and we've known how to do that since the 1970s. We can take a piece of code out of one organism and put it into another organism. That's also genetic engineering. We can write DNA code from scratch. That's synthetic biology. And we can do cool things like debug the source code of life 1 letter at a time. And that is gene editing, which I'm sure you've heard of. We're going to come back to that in a minute. But so let's go back to this idea of being engineers of life. Think of a computer. An app is a program that does one thing, right? It carries out a task. It takes some kind of input, does something to that input, and then makes some kind of output. Well, you can think of living things as doing the same thing, taking source code as input, and then running it and creating an output. And I know that you have experienced this in your daily life from just watching the last 1.5 years, because this synthetic biology paradigm is the basis for RNA vaccines, like the Pfizer vaccine and the Moderna vaccine against SARS-CoV-2. So the way that worked was back in January 2020, when Chinese researchers uploaded the first sequence of the coding instructions for SARS-CoV-2. It has an RNA genome, same idea. Then what scientists at a whole bunch of companies, including BioNTech and including Moderna, were able to do was to take that code, digitize it, and then say, okay, which parts of this encode for parts of the virus that we think the human body is going to be able to recognize and mount an immune response against. And so if you've gotten your COVID shot, And if you haven't yet and it's available to you, I highly recommend you go get your vaccination as quickly as possible. I got Moderna. I was very excited about that. That vaccine, an RNA vaccine, is taking the instruction manual for building only part of the virus, which is why the vaccines can't make you sick. That code gets loaded into you. You're the hardware. Your body then boots up those instructions, makes a little piece of one of the proteins of the coronavirus, and then your immune system learns to recognize that, and that's how you're immunized. So this is happening right now. And in fact, the founders of BioNTech are a husband-wife team who are living in Germany. They're of Turkish descent. And Dr. Özlem Türeci has been recognized as potentially someone who's having the greatest impact on humanity in the last year and a half of anyone else on Earth. And I have to say, if you are going to impact 1 billion lives, here was a great way to have done it. So we thank her very much for what she's done. And in fact, these companies believe that these RNA vaccines are going to be important for so much more than just COVID. So if you think that there are cancer vaccines coming, I would keep an eye on this space. That's what I'm doing. Now, I said that DNA is both a parts list and a coding language, which means that you can add parts to the list and you can take parts out. And if you add a part to that parts list to the genome, the cell will build it for you, just like our bodies are building the protein that we get the instructions for from our COVID vaccines. And so this is really exciting because it means that the genome is kind of like the chassis on a car. You can plug and play different elements to get different results. So maybe I want to put in a piece of DNA that says, hey, make this drug. Or maybe I want to put a piece of DNA into a bacterium that allows it to eat plastic in the ocean. Or maybe I want to insert a piece of DNA that lights up, that makes a protein that lights up when it encounters something like cancer DNA. All of these things are empowered by a paradigm called synthetic biology that we are going to be seeing more and more of in the coming years. If the 20th century was the computer age, the 21st century is going to be the biology age. And what this means is that living things can become factories, they can be computers, they can be sensors, they can be power plants. All of these things can come from synthetic biology, meaning that using biotechnology, we could be getting all the food, fuel, and fiber that we need in order to support the billions of people who live on this earth while still being friendly to the environment and keeping our civilization sustainable for many, many years to come. So where are we going with synthetic biology and other biotechnologies? I found this great quote in The Economist that I wanted to share with you because I want you to take a minute to really picture this. So picture perhaps a world where machines now made of metal and plastic are instead made of flesh and bone. Pets and garden plants can be designed to order. Mammoths, once again, thunder over the tundra. That's a real thing. People are bringing mammoths back. And human reproduction itself ceases to be a matter of luck. This means that using these tools, these biotechnological tools, we have the chance to radically impact life on this planet, including humans. And so again, that's that idea of gene editing. The most famous one of these gene editing technologies that you've probably heard of is called the CRISPR system. CRISPR is a system that was actually taken, it wasn't invented by humans, it was taken from the bacterial immune system. Humans just figured out how to change it around a bit and use it as a tool. And what we're seeing today is already, this is not science fiction, we are already seeing the impacts of CRISPR on human health. And so it turns out that gene editing comes in two big flavors. The first one of those flavors is called somatic editing. Somatic editing is soma meaning body. Somatic editing means that you only change the body and that change isn't passed on. So if, for example, picture I had a skin tumor and I used CRISPR to edit the DNA of those tumor cells to be back to normal cells, well, I wouldn't pass that on to my son or my daughter, right? I've only changed my skin. Now, again, this is not science fiction. This is already happening. There are already clinical trials going on today for somatic gene editing. So for example, there are trials going on for cancer immunotherapies. There are also gene editing trials for types of blood disorders like sickle cell anemia and beta thalassemia. There's a trial going on for an inherited form of blindness where you actually inject the CRISPR components into the retina of the eye. And in one that I think is really interesting, folks are also using gene editing to try to fight urinary tract infections, which can be really, really, really hard to cure any other way. So keep your eyes open for progress in this area because we're going to be seeing very, very soon data coming from these trials. Now, the second flavor of gene editing is one called germline editing. Germline editing is when the edit that you make to the DNA actually gets passed down to the next generation. How do you do that? Well, you do that either by editing a sperm, editing an egg, or editing an embryo before it starts growing into a fetus and then eventually into a person. And as you might imagine, this technique, the germline technique, is far more controversial than the somatic technique. You might remember at the end of 2018, the shocking news broke that 2 baby girls had been born in China who had been edited as embryos. Now, those 2 girls, their names are Lulu and Nana. There's at least one other child out there that nobody is talking about. But this was a huge controversy. There were all kinds of ethical issues that had happened. There was all kinds of scientific questions that still haven't been answered. And what we saw was that the technology was moving much faster than people thought, including Emmanuelle Charpentier and Jennifer Doudna, the women who were did some of the earliest work on the CRISPR system and who won the Nobel Prize just this last year for that. Now, the story isn't over because folks realize that these tools are potentially some of the most powerful tools we have to fight human genetic disease. So how can we use them in ways that are ethical, that are moral, that are embracing our humanity, but are still saying, we've got a really important chance here where we could change the trajectory of humanity for good in a really important way. And however, it's not clear yet how to do that. And in fact, the scientist who was responsible for the experiments that led to those children has been sentenced to prison and will not be allowed to work again in reproductive medicine. So these are super important questions and conversations that we need to be asking right now. These aren't questions for our children. They're questions for us because the time is now, the moment is here. And it's so important for us to have so many voices, men, women, any kind of gender from all over the world having these conversations. Now, I mentioned that the CRISPR-Cas system, a lot of the early work on it was done by 2 women who won the Nobel Prize last year. So until 2020, it turned out that only 5 out of 184 winners of the Nobel Prize in Chemistry were women. I'm showing you a picture here of the first woman who won the Nobel Prize in Chemistry. This is Dr. Marie Curie. Now, when Marie Curie won the Nobel Prize in 1911 for chemistry, making her the first woman to win that prize, that was actually her second Nobel Prize. She had already won a Nobel Prize in physics in 1904. I want you to remember her. We're going to come back to her in a minute. So last year, when Doudna and Charpentier shared this prize, it was a huge deal. 2 women not sharing a Nobel Prize with a man in chemistry, this area that has traditionally been dominated by men. This was a huge deal. And so go home and tell your daughters that they can win Nobel Prizes too, because this is where we're seeing the impact that women are having on STEM and potentially on, I mean, honestly, I can't think of a more important breakthrough that we could be having. Medicine, agriculture, everything is being touched by gene editing because it touches DNA, and DNA is the source code of all life. So how did Jennifer Doudna, one of the women who worked on CRISPR, how did she get interested in science? So she actually grew up on the big island of Hawaii when she was a kid. And while most of her teachers didn't seem to expect very much of her, she did have some teachers that were interested in her and that were interested in what interested her. She loved hiking. She loved looking at plants and mushrooms. And then she would go and talk to her science teachers about them and say, hey, this is what I saw. I wonder what it means. And she says that one of the most important things that happened to her as a young woman that helped direct her towards STEM career was her father gave her a copy of a book called The Double Helix, written by James Watson, the man I told you about when we were talking about the DNA structure. Now, I'm showing you here my copy of this book. I have this book. I've read this book several times. And the reason that this was so informative to her and to actually many, many scientists around the world is that the double helix tells the story of science by looking at the people who actually did the science. So seeing scientists as people is something that we're not always very good at. So yes, I own a copy of this book, but actually this is not the book that I would share with my daughter to inspire her to go work on DNA. I instead would point her toward a book called The Code Breaker, which recently came out, which is about Jennifer Doudna specifically, but looks more about the many people, the many men and women who worked on CRISPR and are thinking about where it's going as a technology. You can also check out a documentary on Netflix called Human Nature, where Jennifer Doudna, again, is really prominent in this documentary, looking at how CRISPR and other gene technologies are really poised to impact our life. Now, okay, so I would give my daughter, if I had a daughter, I only have a son, and he's wonderful. If I had a daughter, I would give her a copy of The Code Breaker, but I would also give her a copy of this book. So I am showing you here a picture of one of my prized possessions. This is a biography of Marie Curie, the woman we were just talking about. The Marie Curie biography that was written by her daughter, Eve. Now, funnily, Eve was the daughter of Marie Curie who didn't win a Nobel Prize. Marie Curie's other daughter, Irene, also won a Nobel Prize in 1935 for chemistry. So super impressive family, right? The women all went on to do amazing things. So I would share this book with my daughter because even though it's a bit old-fashioned, there's some stories in here that are, I think, incredibly inspiring and incredibly important. And I've told my son these stories, and now I'm going to tell you one of them because I think they are so important when we're thinking about the impact that women can have in STEM. So this book is interesting because it does tell the story of the early days when Marie and Pierre were doing all of their important work on radium and figuring out all these amazing physics. But it also tells her story after she won her second Nobel Prize. By the way, only 4 people in history have ever won 2 Nobel Prizes. Marie Curie is one, Linus Pauling is another one, Frederick Sanger won for DNA sequencing and for protein sequencing, and then the 4th person is John Bardeen, the physicist. So Marie is in very august company here. So in 1914, the world was heading for war. And Marie watched as all of her male colleagues joined the military, and were dispersed to be working on whatever it was they were working on, leaving her behind in Paris. Now, Marie realized that there was a huge problem. She knew that the new weapons that were going to be used in this new war, in World War I, were going to damage human bodies and human lives on a scale that had never before happened. And she knew that almost all the hospitals at or near the front had no X-ray equipment, no way to see what was going on inside a soldier's body when you brought them off the battlefield. Now, Marie had never actually worked on X-rays herself, but she had taught them in her classes because she was, working at the Sorbonne. So she realized that there was no one else who was going to solve the problem of getting X-ray technology to the front. So she decided that she was going to innovate mobile X-ray units. So she went out and she got some money. She got some funds from people that she knew to fund this new startup venture that she had. And she went around to other French women that she knew, and she talked those women into giving her their cars. So she would go, she'd say, hey, I've got this idea, I need your car. And she always promised that she would give the car back, although she never promised that they would be in very good shape because of what she had planned for them. She got 20 cars donated this way, one at a time. And for each one of those cars, with her own hands, she turned each of them into a mobile X-ray unit. She invented an X-ray machine that was small enough and robust enough that it could be moved into battle. And after she had built each one of those 20 mobile X-ray units herself, she drove them herself directly to the front, directly to the battle. And when she got there, she trained men and women on how to use these mobile X-ray units. So like I said, 20 of them she put together. But that wasn't enough for Marie. She also realized that the battlefield hospitals did not have any X-ray technology. So she figured out how to put X-ray rooms into battlefield hospitals. She built 200 of these battlefield X-ray rooms. And she herself would go into these rooms, take the X-rays, look at the information that was in them, and then work with the surgeons on how they were going to save each of these young men who had come in with a terrible injury. And it has been estimated that between her mobile X-ray units and her hospital X-ray units, Marie impacted the lives of more than 1 million soldiers during World War I. I actually, you can see, I get really emotional when I tell this story, because this is the story of a woman who had been fighting her whole life to be recognized by the scientific community. And when she had a chance to step back, instead she stepped up. And she made a huge difference in ways that we are still benefiting from today. Marie Curie is one of my heroes. So I hope I've convinced you that thanks to biotechnology, if the 20th century was the computer age, the 21st century is going to be the biotech age. It's going to be impacting our fight against climate change, protecting our food and our natural resources, and radically transforming our health. And I hope I've also convinced you that women have been making fantastic contributions to these spaces, and that we have even more contributions to give. So how can we help get more women and girls into STEM and technology and empower them to make major lifelong contributions at the highest levels, at all levels throughout? So here are a few suggestions that I have for us. The first thing we need to do is connect. From a very young age, we need to be watching for opportunities to connect our daily lives and the daily lives of our children with STEM and with technology. We need to help girls and boys see that STEM and tech are all around us, making our lives better every single day. And we need to help our girls and our boys understand that every time they use their eyes and their brain and their creativity, they are already being scientists. We need to teach our girls to code. We need to teach our boys to code too. We need to be teaching our people the skills that they need for tomorrow. Our schools are really good at teaching the skills from yesterday, but we need to be looking ahead and saying, what do our children, what do our young people need to learn in order to be successful in a world where STEM and tech are poised to radically impact our lives? So thanks to online innovation in particular, we can be teaching them the skills of tomorrow, even today during pandemic and lockdown and all the uncertainty that we have. So I'm talking about coding, I'm talking about robotics, I'm talking about ethics, design, maker skills. All of these things and more can be learned from a very young age, all the way through your formal education. And even when you're my age, you can be learning to do these things too, all your life. And so that kind of resilience is really the most important skill of all. And I hope you've seen that resilience in the stories that I've told you today about these women in STEM. Because STEM is hard. It's hard for years. And we need to have the resilience and the courage to work hard and to learn hard things so that we can change the world. We also need to keep our eyes open for inspiring stories that we can share with boys, with girls, and with people who are older as well. We're keeping our eyes out for stories that show how powerful and impactful women can be in STEM. Not just scientists and doctors, but entrepreneurs, activists, politicians, and more. We need to be listening to their stories, and we need to be sharing them. And I'd like to invite you to follow me on Twitter and on Instagram. There's my handle. I spend a lot of my time on social media sharing these stories of women who inspire me so that we can go on and do this ourselves in our daily lives. And Argentina, I know you have generations of science women coming up, and it is so important to inspire them to change the world. Now, a friend and colleague of mine, Dr. Jose Mori, has started a media company that's focused on telling the stories of women and people of color in STEM. Now, a lot of these books are meant for young girls to change their perception of what a scientist looks like. And it's to show them that scientists look like them. Scientists aren't men in white coats off somewhere. Scientists are people like you and me, men, women, everyone from all walks of life who are using their minds and their brains to figure out how the world works. So Ad Astra Media, which I'm showing you here, is putting out bilingual editions of their stories. So you can find Spanish titles like Buenas noches, pequeño astronauta, Pequeño Doctor, Pequeño Astrónoma, and Pequeño Veterinario. So I think these stories are great for all ages. I've been sharing them with my son, and I hope you'll have a chance to experience that joy as well, because again, this is a great way to be inspiring the next generation. And finally, we need to be taking a people-centered view, a life-centered view when we build for the future, an ethical view, an inclusive view, because when we're talking about DNA, when we're talking about biotech, we're talking about life. We're talking about the most precious and unique thing that we have. And as far as we know, there's only one place in the universe where there's life, and that's right here on our planet. So we need to build for an abundant future. We need to build for our generations, for Argentina, and for all people. And so how am I doing this? Well, one way I'm doing this is by talking with folks like you all around the world. But I'm also part of an organization called Homeward Bound, which is elevating women with a background in STEM into positions of leadership so that we are increasing our opportunities to contribute to global issues like plastic pollution, deforestation, loss of biodiversity, and most importantly, the climate crisis, which is going to be an existential challenge that we need to be facing starting today as an entire species. So if you're a woman in STEM, or if you know a woman who is, doesn't matter how early in your career you are, come check out Homeward Bound. Applications are open for our next leadership cohort. And it's a great opportunity, and I invite you to come join me. And in fact, one of my heroes is part of Homeward Bound. I'm showing you here, this is Cristiana Figueres. She was born in San Jose, Costa Rica. She was formerly the executive secretary of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. So she's out there fighting the good fight. And here is something that Christina says that I want to share with you. She says, if you do not control the complex landscape of a challenge, and you rarely do, the most powerful thing you can do is to change how you behave in that landscape, using yourself as a catalyst for overall change. Now, remember what a catalyst is, right? Think like a chemist for a minute. A catalyst is something that makes change happen without being used up itself. And so that's what we want to do. We want to catalyze the future. We want to get as much creativity and innovation in the world as we possibly can. And to me, that means empowering women to program the future of life. So this is how you can stay in touch with me. I hope you will. Remind me that we met at Córdoba Tech Week. Come follow me on social media so you can see these stories and more, and find ways together to get our women empowered to be making these fantastic contributions. Thank you very much. I'll stop there.
Hi, Tiffany. I'm Deborah here. Congratulations for your talk. And as a journalist, I could say that we mostly discuss about the lack of women in technology or in STEM careers, but not focus about biotechnology. So I think you are show us a new challenge to achieve. So I know you are very passionate about translating the leading edge of science into actionable insight for the society. Do you think girls or their parents doesn't know about biotechnology? It's about to create, it's about to solve problems.
Yes, absolutely. I am always surprised when people have this idea that science is boring. Science is an incredibly creative pursuit. It's an incredibly collaborative pursuit. You don't go into science because you think you're going to make a lot of money or you're going to, get a lot of sex and drugs and rock and roll. Like, that's not why you go into science. You go into science because the world around you is so beautiful that you can't stop looking at it, and that you want to find ways to be inspired by the natural world to make daily life better. I think at the very fundamental, most fundamental level, that's what science is. It's a creative pursuit of love. And that's what I want everyone to see.
Yes, for example, here in Argentina, we have a lot of students in medicine. I mean, there's more doctors, women, than men. But if we look at another related careers as biology or biotechnology, there's a gap between men and women in this kind of career. Right now, Fabio Grigorchev want to know, isn't it CRISP and their benefits only for rich people?
Oh, so I'm going to respond to the two parts of that. So what you said about there being a gender gap in medicine and in technology, or less of a gender gap in medicine. So in biology, historically, women have been making up 50% or more of undergraduates. So at the undergraduate level, women are very well represented. The problem comes as you move higher and higher up the levels of leadership. At every one of those levels, women drop out of the pipeline. So it's not enough to bring women into STEM. They have to be empowered to stay there. They have to be supported in knowing that they're not going to have to make a choice between family or career, or they're not going to be passed over for a man, even though you're doing the work. All of these things are systemic things, institutional things that we can be working on together in order to make this change happen. And I think what we're going to see is change over time, where first we'll be seeing changes in fields like medicine, like biology, where women tend to be more visible. But as as physics, as engineering, as computer science becomes more welcoming to women, I think we'll see those changes start to trickle up and to see a positive feedback. Now, is CRISPR just for the rich? So you guys know, as technology watchers, that anytime you have an early adoption issue, the early adopters are going to be paying more money for a product that's probably not quite as good. So is CRISPR only for the rich? Today, I mean, even rich people can't necessarily get into these clinical trials. So it is, yes. So the short answer is, in the short term, first, I think we're going to see CRISPR being very expensive, and so working for rich people. But you know what? That's not a world that I want to be building. I want to be building a world where everyone has access to these technological breakthroughs, these health breakthroughs, these food breakthroughs. And we do that by deciding together that we're going to democratize these technologies, that we're going to keep pushing to make them cheaper and faster and still be really, really safe. That doesn't happen by itself. It happens because people like you and people like me decide that that's the world we want to build. And I think we can make that decision together.
Agustina Pérez y Carolina Salcedo ask these questions. What experience of yours led you to decide for this technology field?
So that's a great question. So, you know, even when I was very young, I was fascinated by the way the world worked. And actually, my dad was a chemist. And I grew up thinking I was going to be a chemist. And then I remember I spent a summer in my father's laboratory measuring the carbon content of water. Do you know what the carbon content of water is? It's 0 every day. And I thought to myself, oh my goodness, I cannot do this for a living. Fortunately, I learned a lot as a chemist, which was really important for later. But then I realized when I was looking around that I was really interested in living things. And I had actually thought that meant being a doctor, because when I was young, doctors were the only people that I saw doing stuff that had to do at all with biology. And it wasn't until I was in college and I started working in a genetics laboratory that somebody finally said to me, hey, Tiffany, are you interested in the things we already know, or are you interested in the things we don't know? And I said, good question. I'm interested in the things we don't know. And they said, okay, you need to go get a PhD. You need to go do this research. And that was off to the races. Once I started working as a researcher and realizing I had to invent things in order to answer the questions that I thought were interesting, I was hooked for life.
Some experts say that it's going to take at least 200 years from now to close the gap. What do you think about it?
To close the gender gap in STEM?
Yes.
I don't think it has to take 200 years. I have already seen a difference. So again, I'm not that old, but even there's a difference now from when I was in school and what I'm seeing people now. And what I find really exciting, so my son is 10, And his school has some really, really great STEM maker stuff. They have 3D printers, they have robots, the kids are all learning to code. And what I'm seeing in this classroom with fifth graders is almost no difference between boys and girls. I remember when I was a kid being made to feel embarrassed because I knew the right answer and a boy didn't know. I don't see that anymore. And so what I'm hoping is that we can continue to say, hey, it's okay to be smart. Whether you're a girl, whether you're a boy, whether you're something else, it doesn't matter. If you have something to offer, you are welcome here. And I think we can make those changes faster than 200 years because I'm already seeing it happening.
Yes, I agree with you. I'm also optimistic about this topic because it's like an exponential trend because the children of today should be the STEM professionals of the future. And right now at school, children also have subjects as robotics, coding, this kind of things. So I hope you are right.
And don't forget, we have whole generations now growing up during the pandemic, and they are seeing in real time just how important it is to have science working and how many people from around the world are contributing. This is a potential inspiration once in a generation, maybe once in a century, I hope, moment where humanity gets to step up. And I think of the pandemic as being the dress rehearsal for how we're going to deal with climate change. If we can handle the pandemic, we've got the tools and the mindset and the leaders and the young people who are going to help us tackle climate change.
And right now, there's a lot of companies also talking about this topic because they need talent for doing businesses. You know, they need talent, and women, we have all the abilities to do a great career as a biotechnologist or scientifics, or you know, as well. But do you think when companies talk about this topic, are they talking a marketing slogan, or do you think it's a real issue for us, for them?
Yeah, I think it depends on the company. It depends on the leaders, and it depends on the company culture. I have seen lots of beautiful examples of companies putting their money where their mouth is and getting women in leadership positions, giving them control, and taking away all of these little things that happen over and over to women to undercut them. And I see so many men who are dedicated to being allies, supporting the women that they work with and making sure that the systems really do change. Now, that said, we have a long way to go. You probably know that, for example, venture capital funds, only a fraction of venture capital funds go to startups that are founded by women. That has to change. And that means not just saying it's important, it means writing the checks to different people. And so if you are an investor, if you are a venture capitalist, I challenge you to be part of the change. Find the women founders, find the good ideas, and give them the money that they need in order to be competing in the market with their male counterparts who have always had a boost over the women. You can be an agent of change as well.
Yes, of course. And on the other hand, I think that women in tech that right now are working in technology should work also as an influencer action, because they have to show us their job in order to motivate to the daughters, the girls of tomorrow. No, so.
It's an interesting issue that you're bringing up, because I want to say, yes, we need to be doing this. We need to be role models. We need to be influencers. But you know what? I'm already working twice as hard for 70% as much pay. And then you put on this another issue on top to say, okay, Tiffany, you also have to do the work to inspire the next generation. And that becomes a really difficult extra burden that women are taking on. And so I'm thrilled when I see women doing that. And I'm even more thrilled when I see our male allies stepping up and helping us with that. Because it can't just be us doing all the work and doing the extra work. We need everybody to be coming to this together.
Well, I think I don't have more questions for the audience. So we can keep talking about this topic for a lot of time because it's passionate and we have to fight for the gender equality. So thank you very much, Tiffany, for your time and for sharing with us all your knowledge. And well, we say goodbye with loud applause.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much. Have a nice day.
Of 2021 and Women in Technology in IoT. Let's welcome her, and let me say that Laura Minuet, data science and big data analyst, will be the moderator of the Q&A session from the audience and those of you watching us through streaming. She's a member of BioMed, a member of technology. Let's welcome Laura to welcome Cecilia Flores, who's already waiting for us. Laura, you have the floor now to welcome and to present the last session. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. I'm looking at you, Cecilia. Can you hear me? How are you doing? Very well. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you. It's like I feel like home. It's a great pleasure for me to introduce you. You have a beautiful background. And as the previous presenter said, and let's make it a bit more dynamic, and we will make trigger questions. I will make the first question. Please explain us a little bit the aim of WIBI, the one that of which you are the co-founder.
WIBI is a company of IoT and artificial intelligence. The idea of our product is to enable the development of solutions that are complex for IoT and artificial intelligence. There is a combination of skills, and we created a virtual blackboard where we have this without writing the code and intuitively. The focus of the solution is to help the manufacturing and agricultural companies to improve their projects, to see where there are problems of lack of efficiency or lack of input, and try to help them reduce those problems in a flexible way. That's what we do. And how did it all start, this way for entrepreneurship road? Well, this was founded with Luca Funes some years ago because we understood the potential of technology. We tried to find ways to solve problems of the world. The focus tries to reduce the blueprint that is produced by inefficiencies in agriculture and manufacture, and we try to have different ideas of what was happening with the customers and how to have for a better development, and we follow a certain decision that had to do with what was significant for a company, and after some years we decided to move to Silicon Valley. It was not an objective to come here to Silicon Valley, but it was a result of a decisions that had to do when we developed technology that were emergent technology. It was difficult to find an ecosystem that would understand what we were trying to do, not only for the sale of validation of technology, but for funding also. So we started evolving in this business. We started in Argentina, and from there we went to Miami, in Florida. We had a soft landing in the US, which is a very competitive market. And every time we came to Silicon Valley, we had an acceleration of development, not because it was magical, but because the ecosystem is open to innovation and open to people who are trying to build. We're afraid because the same line is the most competitive place in the world where a lot of people try to achieve the same. And it was a little bit costly also, but finally we decided it was the best for the company to be here, to continue what we did some years ago with partnership with companies that would help us receive a product and define the problem we try to solve through the technology.
Good. What a trip you made. It must have been a very important change, how to think your business model abroad, which is very different. This change, how did it happen? Well, I believe this is the magic of innovating with a global vision, having a very clear idea of what you're trying to solve. From Argentina, we always wanted to create problems of the world, this IoT thing that is very complex, that has this problem of technological skills, which is a global problem. We started in Argentina and we continued, and we developed several markets at the same time because it's a global problem. This gives the company a long-term vision, which is this democratization of IoT. I believe this is important for entrepreneurs to have a business plan that starts on a specific market and you start to develop the market and to grow in development. But you need to have a global, wider vision so as to develop something to solve global problems. This was a perspective, a view that we had from the very beginning, but we were in an advanced industry, and the only ecosystem that would understand the complexity that we were trying to solve was this one. So it makes sense to be here. I always emphasize this because sometimes a trip or an investment here would be enough so as to capture this DNA of the system, so as you don't need to change your operation. You need to have a clear vision and so as to solve and participate in the ecosystem.
And the next question, what difficulties and opportunities did you face when you started to be an entrepreneur? I believe that the first and most significant one that shows the difficulties of being an entrepreneur is not knowing, you don't know what you don't know. It happens a lot when you are beginning something from scratch and when it's the first entrepreneurship. There are many things you don't know, and you don't know you don't know. That's a problem because you make decisions thinking this is the best, and then you realize that there is another vision towards the same problem, which is more efficient. I believe that was one of the greatest challenges, trying to learn things by doing, and then beginning to understand better the speed of development of the company, the strategic partners that we needed, and all of this together, trying to understand what was the best thing for the company, leaving the usual framework. So there is a framework that we all know, which is what an entrepreneurship should achieve, but in the reality is when you are there, things change because there is a different market, because your conditions or resources are more or less, or because you have certain opportunities, you have to match this with what you have to do. This continues to be a significant difficulty as entrepreneur. And the opportunities, this of being able to do by you can bring ideas and to have a team there that can execute it, to be dynamic. It's an enormous opportunity to achieve things that in other organizations more difficult. Many of our partners come to us because they want to try to advance or break certain work schemes or bureaucracies in technological development through our agility. So this is a huge opportunity, and we redefine what we do as a team to fulfill our purpose, which is to democratize the adoption of technology.
And what would you recommend? Because you somehow implement technology without belonging to technology. So that is a question that I make myself, because I belong to technology, but I have no knowledge of business. I don't see myself as an entrepreneur. What would you recommend someone who comes from the world of technology and that knows all these things that you know, that it's not just for one market, but to the whole world? Which are those skills that you had, that you were you trained? How did you develop those skills? Well, in my particular case, I had several years in the enterprise business working for global companies, and this gave me a toolbox that I wouldn't have acquired it if I hadn't worked there. Now I understand my client because I was my client myself. So that's a big volume, and I was part of different organizations that grew, and I participated in their growth. So it's a lot of knowledge. We had this idea of I belong to the business, or I'm an entrepreneur. The two paths are the right ones, but we have different skills. When you belong to an enterprise environment, you have to take advantage of that knowledge of that environment so as to have the tools when the time comes. In my particular case, this was very useful and made a difference. And it's a combination together with Lucas, my partner, who did not belong to the business field. He was an entrepreneur, and this mixture of skills created this synergy as a founding team. And I would recommend someone who's thinking about being an entrepreneur, having training in technology or not, is to feel love for the problem you're trying to solve. Sometimes we focus on the product, on the idea, on the technology, and we lose the focus of the client, that person that will pay for the product, the one who will feel that is the aspirin for your headache. And every time we talk about training and skills, I always think about that. The skills show up when you have a clear idea of the market you're working on, the problem your client has, and how you're going to solve it. That's the first step. That's my piece of advice. It's not clear, and it changes with the time. And you start with one problem, and you redefine that problem, but that problem needs to have the different sections so as to motivate you to solve it. If you're an entrepreneur in technology because you can make a lot of money, it might be difficult to move forward because being an entrepreneur is very difficult with a lot of effort. You need a lot of resilience, and sometimes you don't get the results. Sometimes it's okay, you do okay, but most of the times things are a lot more difficult, and we are trying to open the way, paving the way when you're not known in new market, and the only way to keep that idea is to be convinced of the problem you want to solve and having that inner passion that we don't need to lose track of. The purpose, being resilient, being open to receive feedback, and that sometimes the feedback is not good, and it's okay. Some people may say they don't like your ideas, that you lack some items, that they don't believe in what you're doing. And so you need to balance the feedback and how to reinvent yourself and keep moving forward. I believe those are the most important skills, having a clear idea of why you're doing what you're doing and using that as a drive so as to face the challenges that you always face.
I read an article in Forbes that says Cecilia Flores that received the award for entrepreneurship from Melinda Gates Foundation. Well, how did you feel when you found out about this award? How was the road to be able to get that award? Well, it was a pathway that I believe was the conclusion of the work we have been working for 2 years. We tried to redefine the product. And this contest also, when you started in entrepreneurship, you apply everything, sometimes frustrated when you're not chosen. And it has to do with finding a space that is focused on the same thing as you do. In this competition is a B2B company that are trying to build the same as we are. So we applied for 2 years. The first one for the contest, we were not even finalists, but I remember that what we liked about it was the process for the application. Because there is a form that I believe it was 20 pages long, hyper intense. But after you answer the questions and you are convinced of the answer and you revalidate your focus, it was a big learning process. And it leads us to lots of question marks. And the next year we prepare ourselves to have the answers for those question marks. And in this response are the business hypothesis, which is significant to understand what an investment is expecting for you to have a business hypothesis that is solid, backed up by data, but what you want to prove. They don't want everything that you have all the answers, because if you had all the answers, you would not need capital. But if in the second year we tried to have some feedback on what we were doing with Microsoft as backup, they focus a lot on IoT, and we applied, not thinking that we were going to win. We enjoyed the process since we saw the other companies. We were the only Hispanic group in all the applications. And in the other cases, there were super powerful projects, and we enjoyed the road and the day of a final pitch when we introduced the company to the jury. We tried to enjoy the project. The expectation was not on winning, but on showing what we wanted to do with all the passion we have. That was the objective. Let's go there, enjoy it. It creates relationships, and let's see what happens when they sent us the mail saying that we were saved the awards. We read it 3 or 4 times to see if we had understood it correctly. It was a beginning and end at the beginning because it was the right partner. The partner for what that validated a pathway and the project.
For how long had you had this business? Well, when we won that, we had it for 5 or 6 years. Well, that was you had a robust company already. Yeah, there were several years in the company that we did bootstrapping. And so we moved out of our licensed business so as to offer services to corporations with the aim of being part of the client so as to understand how to build a better product. This sounds obvious, but as an entrepreneur, since you have to do lots of things at the same time with little time, and you lose track and you focus too much on the product, or you try to make your product the best and you lose track of the client. For some years we stopped and we spent a lot of time literally in the office of our clients so as to build the product that we nowadays have, and this took some time, but it was the right time that was necessary so as to have a valuable product. And if you look back, what would you like to say, or what would you have liked to know when you started, and so as to avoid the things that you didn't like that you would have liked to know beforehand, in addition to this path, of course, that you said, okay, you liked it, but you would have avoided it? I believe it has to do with the conviction as an entrepreneur. I'm thinking about things that are useful to the people listening. And this idea of having a framework to be an entrepreneur, where we need to follow a work path, but it has to do a lot with being involved in your project, and your partners can see that, and you try to fit in one particular framework, and you move away from that place. And when you're small and you don't have lots of credentials to show, the difference is that one: what you are, why you are doing what you're doing, and what you can offer as an entrepreneur, as an individual, in addition to the product, the team, and the company. What do you have as a leader that will make your vision real? That's why the purpose is essential. You need to find something that motivates you, in addition to money, which is the end result. This idea of finding something that lets you feel complete and being able to transmit that in the learning curve, trying to fit as a woman in this model of being a women entrepreneur in technology, speaking in a certain way, or conveying an image that is not what I actually am. So I try to inspire others with my work. And also there are some myths that being an entrepreneur is the pathway to freedom, and I'm happy and I manage my time, and it's exactly the opposite. Being an entrepreneur means that if you work 9 hours before a day, now you work the 24 hours. So it's a lifestyle. It's not a work. You don't choose one thing or the other. You change your way of living. You are thinking about your company 24/7, thinking about the people working with you, your ecosystem, your contacts, your investors, your clients, your team. And this really requires a commitment that goes beyond any feeling of responsibility in a different workplace. It's working twice as much, and this permanent obligation. And you also have this the good part of it, but of course at the beginning you have this ideal image. I would still choose this path, but it's not the path to freedom. And also, I would like to say that ideas are not are just the trigger to start a path, but an idea that is not well thought or that does not reply to, or does not have a business plan does not progress. So you still have this idea of having a good idea with a good PowerPoint, with a good pitch. I will raise capital and I will be successful. There are lots of people doing valuable things, but you need to understand from the very beginning that you need to make this something profitable and provide a tool to solve someone's problems. That is the way to find the right answer to the right question. You need to focus, and this is what we did. We focused a lot on the product, and we lost track of the business plan, the market, and we had to reformulate that so as to have a financial architecture that would accompany our business model.
Very clear. To tell you the truth, it's very clear what you tell about the difference between product, how this relates to the market, because you may have the best product in your mind, but it's not for the right market that is needing that. So today, technology is what the market needs today. So see that the technology is adapted to the needs of the market. And for me, that's the key. Something happened to us several times, and I listened to it. When you focus too much on the product, you develop a product that has 1,000 features. And when you start talking about the client wants only 5%. The clients need something simple that will solve a specific problem. And then you can grow in that platform, in the product. When you focus on trying to understand how the mind of that customer works, what are the problems that keep him awake, then the product is adapted. So it's easy to lose sight on the way, and we are not used to investing time on this. Happened with the pandemic, we lost sight of the customer a little bit because we're not there, but it's important to see how the product is used. What are they doing? How do they install it? And many times that happens to us. We come back to the blackboard to do what we're doing 10 times simpler because that's what the customer needed. There's value. The road is short.
In this interview, you were talking about being an entrepreneur, a woman interpreter, entrepreneur. And what was it like for you? How did you keep track of that path? Well, with a lot of resilience. Of course, I always focused on what I wanted to do by overcoming the different obstacles. I didn't think about gender issues or why certain things were more difficult for me as a woman. And as the time went by, I realized that I had to validate my view, my participation as a woman, even more than men. And it's still a challenge because we have, I work in very chauvinist environments, but now there is a bigger tendency to include women and to talk about stereotypes. Something that happened to me in this discovery path is being conscious about my own gender biases. Sometimes you put a lot of energy on the other side and how other people think about women, but we don't think about ourselves, how we look down on ourselves and how we are the victims of ourselves. Many times I didn't fight for the equal conditions because I accepted the conditions that were not fair for a woman. So the path is very difficult and it's complex. There is no representation in decision-making positions. I was listening to the previous speaker talking about the 2.3% of Silicon Valley companies, 0.8 now before the pandemic. It's 2.3 now. It went down instead of going up, and we need equal opportunities. But there is a lot of work personal work that we need to do. We need to wonder if this is the right decision for the company, for my client, or am I being discriminated against for being a woman? Personally, we also have the power of doing, because if we have the power of doing to work on those issues, that's more powerful than sit and wait for a solution. So we have to dare to speak up and say why, when something is not fair, and to knock at someone's door. Sometimes it's more difficult because you're a woman, and when my partner, who's a man, he receives an answer, and we say, why is this happening? And you said, pointing it out, I usually say, why didn't you answer to me? Because I wrote 3 emails. Sometimes it's not intentional, but you have to do this. You need to make people aware of this.
That's perfect. And as you were talking, I thought about the syndrome of imposters. And we talk a little bit about this. We are trying to bring women to technology. There's a program we start that is focused on working on this, that for women to start thinking on and being entrepreneurs. So they start thinking from scratch on the idea of being an entrepreneur, to change the chip from 0, not when they are advanced, and to start with the new generations and saying that you should think differently. And this of the imposter syndrome, something that we work a lot with other women, because it comes up at every time, and we always talk about this. No, I'm not trained for this. So, as you say, something that we have inside, and we should change it. In this sense, I share an experience that has to do when I started to go closer to technology. The first time I understood IoT and artificial intelligence, I remember I started writing one-pager, and as a partner, I started to learn, and I felt power, because I said, I understand what this is about, and I can do things with this. And it was overcome a barrier. When it's too tech, I leave it for another person, because I don't know so much about the technology. I try to understand, and I believe that we still have to some way to go to see technology for doing. Sometimes you see entrepreneurs who are women in areas that are more female-oriented. So this has to do with the imposter syndrome, when you think that I cannot do this, because that's the example with which I grew up. And we have to share stories of women who were successful. It's good, so that we see role models, and it's real. Most of the role models are men, so we should visualize ourselves.
Now we have you as a role model, so that's good. And now I will make some questions from the audience. Of course, if you want to develop any other idea that before we start with questions? No, I'm happy to share my thoughts on what people are interested in. So, do you believe you can start a company alone? How important is it to have a team? No, you cannot do a startup alone. I believe you can have an idea of your own. It's very difficult to be an entrepreneur. You don't have 100% of the skills needed so as to have a team in a company. creating a technological product, it's not just having an idea or executing the technology, it's also the business plan, the company vision, how to grow and so forth, so on. And that's very difficult to get in only one company. When we won the prize, the jury said that they liked the compatibility between Lucas, my partner, and myself. He had this knowledge about entrepreneurship and technological knowledge, and I had the business knowledge. And I believe the path is very difficult if you are alone. Problems change all the time, and they get bigger, and decisions get bigger, and the impact is bigger, and going through that path alone is very difficult. And you need to have a partner or an ally or a co-funder, but also a team that will do it with you. It's not possible to do it alone. It's necessary to have a team. And so in order to have a team, something that we learned is not just go out and hire people, but to build long-term relationships, people who are committed with your cause and to give their lives to make it happen. So you have such a big work and challenge that if you don't feel it deep inside, it's very difficult to sustain it in time. So the short answer for me is that you cannot do it alone. There might be a few cases, but I believe having a team is essential so as to escalate. And I believe you need to find a team so that in addition to the competencies is involved in your cause.
Another question. Do you see any difference in female and male leadership? I see how each other supplement each other. It's difficult to talk outside my experience. But in our case, what we see, what I bring is a macro-analytical view. I'm always with a zoom in and zoom out of what is happening, and Lucas has a more analytical, punctual view. So with this gives us a much better view. There are differences, but we complement each other. I would not like to say that a woman is like this and a man is different. There are some differences, but complementing each other is what makes a team rich. We have such a perception and we understand what is happening beyond, and to predict that, which is more likely to be part of what women do, and men seem to be more pragmatic. So we complement each other, and there are many teams that have this shared view.
Yes, nowadays we talk about comprehensive teams because we aim at having a comprehensive society. It's not just for one sector, and you will not move forward. And so multidisciplinary teams are really rich, and it's not belonging just from one branch or gender. Yes, and multicultural, it's very difficult, especially in small organizations where the impact of every single individual is very big. So having people from different cultures is very important. And sometimes we try to solve something and somebody comes with a new idea and simplifies it because they have a different way of facing that issue. So this diversity from the point of view of culture and gender is very important. Roxana Navarro is asking from ITCC SA institution, what do you think about forcing a gender balance through legislations? Is it good or bad? I believe it's a very political question. But going back to what I was saying, so as to make decisions, we need to be represented. And so at the beginning, this representativity may need to be forced so as to achieve this. This is from an environment that I know. In capital funds, when I introduced my company to American men of some cultural background, it's more difficult for me. I might be represented, but they need to understand where I come from. But if in that environment you have Latin people, women, or black people, then from different cultures, then it's different. So forcing this change at the beginning is necessary, probably. So otherwise, we will wait for many years for the change to happen. So being represented is important to achieve inclusion. I don't want to give an opinion on a very specific case, but I do believe that sometimes you need to force it so as to make the change happen. So hopefully in many years, it may not be needed to be an obligation.
We always say that we are an organization that we hope to disappear and become another thing, not just working with women and with diversity, but beginning to work today. But today, we have to work like this in areas where women are a minority. So that's our point of view. Going back to what we were talking before, a lot that has to do with gender and gender bias, behavior learned, and you are unconscious. It just, if you feel more or less identified sometimes, that's something that we learned from all our lives, and we shouldn't. Being forced to include women can lead to a change. Yes. And I have another question. Franco wants to know, how significant do you think to generate agile culture and to implement those methodologies? It's very significant, especially when you are opening a market, being an entrepreneur, when you develop a market feed and customers that are ready to pay for that is very dynamic because the market is moving or the client begins to use the product, and this gives to change what difference the companies that are successful from those who are not is the possibility of adapting to change very quickly. And sometimes it's difficult for engineers to fail and get up again. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't focus on a quality product, but we shouldn't lose sight that it's important to use it so that we know where the focus is. When you delay too much in the product is complex, you go to the market and the customer needed 10%, and so you wasted valuable time for development that could have been refocused. So the agile methodologies and agile teams complement that. We fail quickly, we improve in the areas where it is important to improve so that we can have a market feed. Then we can make the market grow and focus on quality or the areas that have to do with the scale up of the product. This has to do with Silicon Valley. Get out, fail quickly, and not waste time in the perfect product that nobody wants to pay for that. And then you have a pandemic on top of that. Then you lose.
Now, Emilce is asking, with the competence that we have nowadays, how did you feel arriving to the United States from Argentina? How did you work on marketing to be known and working with partners? Well, we did a lot of free work. So what differentiates you at the beginning is yourself as an entrepreneur. Companies know you are a startup. You don't need to lie or wear a suit we're like a big companies, especially our companies that are big companies, and they are betting on you because you have the startup. And the relationship with the ecosystem is very important. We focus at the beginning, especially in a new ecosystem, is to create confidence, finding those strategic partners to build a relationship. Not from the transactional point of view, I have this super idea because you will not sell that idea because you don't have a lot of things to show, but you need to set your mind in building. You have this, we have this, let's build something together, and you create this relationship. And those relationships are the ones that help you escalate your product so that you become to be known in the environment, so that you make your own name. That was our strategy, and I think it works pretty well. And I believe marketing is knowing the ecosystem and building strong alliances with industry associations, clients that are willing to work with you, working for free, partnerships that may not be profitable for the company, but that build knowledge and of the client, for example, always being open so as to learn and so as to find this market fee.
This is the last question that I got. If you do not have anything else, I would like to thank you for being here and moderating your speech. It was very significant. It's very important for me to be here. You are a role model for me and for any person who wants to be an entrepreneur. And since you are a female entrepreneur, I believe this has been very clear what you have said. Thank you very much. Thank you to all you, and for all women who are there. Go knock at doors and break paradigms and move forward. Thank you.
We wanted to listen more. Tomorrow we will continue talking about innovation, and I would like to invite you to join us tomorrow at 4 p.m. I will give some pieces of advice so that you take notes, so that you don't lose our Tech Week. Innovation, case studies, and Spanish companies. We will talk about sports. We will have two sportsmen, very well-known sportsmen. You might know who I'm talking about. Technology applied to automobile, racing. The importance of digital therapies, why to innovate, and the fourth presentation, culture and leadership, agile mindset, so as to transform companies based on cultural change. Let me thank the Commission and the partners of Cluster Technology of Córdoba that made this today's session possible. And so as to conclude, let's conclude the third day in this session. We will share with you this video that summarizes the spirit of the Cluster Córdoba Technology, so as to close this session with these images and with this voice, what it all means to Cluster Córdoba Technology that will celebrate its anniversary this month. We will wait for you tomorrow at 4 p.m. Thank you.
En 2001, un grupo de empresas de tecnología creó el Córdoba Technology Cluster, impulsando programas para acompañar el crecimiento del sector TIC y hacer de Córdoba el mejor lugar para el desarrollo de la industria tecnológica. De las primeras 10 empresas que empleaban a 500 personas, a 130 entre empresas y universidades en 2010, marcando un crecimiento exponencial. 20 años después, el clúster es una comunidad de 300 socios que emplea más de 14.000 talentos. Sector privado, público y académico, aliados estratégicos para impulsar la economía del conocimiento. Más empresas, más trabajo de calidad. Tenemos muchos desafíos por delante. Cada vez somos más, creando futuro.